Hey there. Tonight, smoke-blackened beams, gruit ale, pottage, kettle and dice clattering under guttering rushlights. Who finds warmth in the stench and noise? What bargains change hands after midnight? Settle in, and we'll step through the doorway together. Before you get too cozy, if this kind of quiet storytelling helps you drift off, you can tap like and subscribe without lifting your head from the pillow. While you're there, tell me the city you're listening from and what time it is. I'm always curious how late you're keeping me company. Now dim the lights, let a small fan add that gentle hum, soften your breathing, and let's slip into tonight's journey together. The rain has been busy turning the lanes to slurry. Not dramatic rain, not a storm worth naming, just the patient drizzle that soaks through hood and habit alike and makes every edge of the city feel softened and uncertain. Our traveller stands for a breath beneath the EU, one boot in the street's thin river, one poised above the threshold plank. The tavern door is swollen from the damp, its iron strap hinges spotted with old rust like a map of forgotten islands. A painted board, creaking from a single hook, shows a faded emblem, an animal that might once have been proudly legible, but tonight looks more like a memory than a sign. The door gives only after the traveller lifts the latch with a steadying thumb and leans with the kind of insistence learned from many such doors. Inside comes sound before sight, the flick of dice on wood, a quick bird-like laugh, the hiss of liquid where it should not have spilled, and the soft, constant breath of a hearth that has been alive all day. Crossing a threshold is always a small ceremony. On one side, the wet, the wind, the anonymous city with its narrow judgments and long shadows. On the other, human weather, heat, toil, appetite, a microclimate, healed by body. The tavern places a hand on the traveller's chest, immediately warmth pressing through the wool like a quiet admonition to unclench. The air is thick with choicer, smoke from green wood and older peat, a few notes of sharpness that might be spilled ale turning sour at the edge of a bench leg, damp wool steaming from a cluster of shoulders, a freckled resin scent from the rushlights guttering along their iron spikes. Under it all, a backbone of cooking, onions, barley, and the deep, familiar breath of a pot that has seldom gone cold this season. Vision adjusts in strata. The eye learns the room first by its fire. The hearth glows like a slow moon and makes a little theatre of the nearest table. 4 men, each cropped by smoke and shadow into emblematic pieces of themselves, a thumb tapping the table in time with a thought, a jaw working over a tough bite, the poker straight back of a man who learned posture from pride or drill, the quiet curve of a smile half hidden by a cup. Beyond that, further islands emerge, a pair bent close over dice, their voices low enough to stay out of the keeper's notice. A woman with a ledger and a stub of chalk, adding something that requires care, a boy with hair like brindled straw, ferrying a jug that sloshes and a plate that does not, in the dimmest margins. The bench where the day's last arrivals flatten their backs and consider making the night here rather than the road. The traveller does not rush the route. Etiquette is not written, but it is legible. Step to the side after entering so the door can breathe. Let your eyes signal patience. Keep your hands at ease and your coin invisible. The keeper who is not the owner, but who is sovereign after sundown watches with the detached focus of a miller studying the run of grain. She gestures with her chin to a place where new folk sit without fracturing the room's existing negotiations. Like a ferry master, she knows the current. Our traveller nods, sheds a measure of rain at the threshold mat made of past harvests, and moves. Beneath the beams, history hangs openly. Dried herbs dangle in neat bundles, their twine cutting little grooves into the wood. Some are practical sage and savoury for pot, rosemary for a roast when generosity allows it, others medicinal in the household scent. A leaf steeped to ease and ache, a poultice for a stubborn swelling. A row of iron pots catches hearthlight and throws it back in gentle pulses. Rounded hills, warm to the eye, each promising a different slope of flavour. From a smoke hole high above comes a tired draught, not enough to clear the room, but enough to tug the haze into slow rivers that drift from beam to beam, as if the building were thinking at a lazy pace. The bench the traveller reaches is cross-braced and polished by years of uneasy sitting. The wood carries stories in dents and stains, a cup knocked over when laughter tripped over itself, a blade set down too hard after a word landed wrong, wax tears from a candle stub that failed at patience. At the table's edge, a small trench reveals itself, no artisan's groove, simply the long work of knives and spoons, worry and habit. The cup that arrives is earthenware, its glaze crazed into a spiderweb of faint lines. It holds ale that has travelled only as far as the yard and the cool corner where a cask stand, not yet hopped in the fashion that will become fashionable. The drink is soft with grain and edged with the small, bright bitterness of herbs that knew the hedgerow not long ago. You can understand why people trusted this more than a public wet. It tastes like effort, warmth, and a decision to live through the day. Around our traveller, the room performs what it always performs, its argument for itself. A merchant and his assistant are sorting tomorrow in scraps of Latin that fall apart when the numbers get personal. A pair of craftsmen are quietly deciding how much they will tell their wives about the cost of repairing a tool whose failure would shame them far more than this small deceit. An itinerant soldier, his cloak patched with a methodical hand, drinks slowly, not to dull anything, but to widen the bridge between who he is now and who he must be when he is next higher. The boy with the jug has learned to walk as if he were a question that only occasionally requires an answer. If you linger on the faces, details confess themselves kindler. The keeper's hands are square and capable. She carries authority not at the hip where a weapon might rest, but at the shoulders, which know when to level and when to tilt. Her glance is a ledger. Who is near quarrel? Who needs a last bowl to soften a rough edge? On a wall near the door, a board has been chalked with marks that are not quite letters, not quite numbers. The shorthand of an establishment that serves both coin and credit. A small bell sits near the hearth, its rim notched from years of being set down too firmly. It rings only when needed, and it is not yet needed. There is filth here, and we will not lie about it. The floor is layered with rushes that were fresh weeks ago, and are now travelogues of the room's daily weather grit and peel. A feather, seeds that rode in on some hem, but discomfort does not choke out comfort, it merely frames it. The damp boots, the smoke that finds your eye, the occasional sweetness of a spill turning, these are not exceptional. They are the price of membership in a place that keeps the night away in a practical manner. Warmth is not perfect here, it is sufficient, and it is shared. Our traveller takes first bread, dark, dense, cut with the side of a knife that has also had other lives, and then pottage, that has simmered so long it seems to speak fluently with the spoon. There are roots in it, and the ghost of a bone, and the quiet conviction of barley. To eat this is to shake hands with dozens of afternoons. Because the pot remembers, it carries forward small kindnesses, an extra onion someone traded for, a splash of oil when a neighbour had a better week, a quiet pinch of salt saved from elsewhere. No one announces this arithmetic. It is lived rather than explained. Time, in a tavern, is braided. There is the quick time of games and where a heartbeat can feel expensive. There is the medium time of negotiation, where a cup goes down empty right as a promise firms up. And there is slow time, the time of cooking, of drying herbs, of smoke persuading wood to change colour. The traveller sips and settles into slow time first. That is the safest choice for a body that has been in the weather and has not yet learned the room's grammar. What bargains change hands after midnight? Not only coins for cup, though those are honest enough. A man down on his luck trades a story for leniency on his tab. A woman who has seen too much of other people's tempers trades a small favour for a night of peace near the hearth. A road-weary messenger trades a square foot of bench space for the news he carries, shaved of names but fat with implication. In the corner, two neighbours trade a season of suspicion for the firm handshake of an agreed fence line, the way men sometimes do when the witnesses are casual and the stakes are local. These trades are the tavern's real stock. They do not show on the chalkboard. Our traveller learns the last rule without being told. Keep your back where you can feel wood. Keep your words in the register of the room. When the door lifts on its latch again and the draught visits the floor rushes, everyone looks up, just enough to know whether the weather has changed outside. Or inside. It has not. The door settled. The keeper lifts a brow. The boy finds another plate. The dice rattle once, twice, and then pause as if listening to their own luck. The threshold is behind us now. The room has taken our measure and offered its terms. Warmth with conditions. Food with history. Drink with caution. Company with rule. Stay, it says, and you will owe us nothing you did not already owe. The night a little patient, a little attention. A decision to be human among humans for the span of a few cups. Our traveller nods without moving. The rain continues its tireless arithmetic outside, but in here the sums add gently, and the ledger of the evening opens to a clean page. The room explains itself if you let it. Not in words, but in the way breath moves. Heat gathers low and thick, as if it prefers the company of knees and elbows, rising only in slow negotiations toward the rafters where the smoke lives. The ceiling is not high, it leans down with the intimacy of a whisper. The beams are black as river stones and carry the gloss that time gives to anything it has held long enough. Smoke has polished them in the way a million glances polish a favourite thought. From those beams hang small decisions, a loop of twine that will be pressed into service before the night is over. A crooked nail where a lantern might sit when somebody finally remembers to fetch more tallow. A bundle of something herbal that gives up its scent only when a draught climbs and stirs it. Rushlights do not burn like the tidy lamps of later centuries. They gutter, salt, flare, and make their own web. Each is a small experiment in Fey, a reed core dipped in fat, convincing flame to behave like a tool. Sometimes it behaves. The little flames throw light that behaves like coin in a room full of needs rarely distributed evenly. The nearest faces become theatres of expression, while the far tables are left to suggestion and silhouette. Sight works in statements and ellipses. A hand is clear, but the mouth behind it is not. A cup gleams while the eyes that watch it remain private. This unevenness is not a flaw, it is the operating system. The room's hierarchy writes itself in light. Those who want to be seen move nearer the hearth or sit where a lamp's tantrum happens to favour them. Those who prefer the comfort of low profile find the benches that the smoke loves best, and let the haze draw a curtain for them. The floor under all this is not a single thing, but a collaboration between earth and habit. Packed dirt does the main work, patient and strong. Over it lies a layer of rushes that began the month with a green pride and now serve as a chronicle. Straw darkened by spill, bristles matted by boots, a crushed sprig here and there, a feather that somehow resisted every brew. In some houses the rushes would be changed by season. In others, when a smell argued too well, here the AG of them is written in a vocabulary of soft crackles and the way dust lifts when someone stands. People do what people always do. They adapt. They plant their feet where the floor is quietest. They angle the bench legs to find steadier ground. They accept the tactful shifting of their souls as part of the night's price. Smoke has two lives in a room like this. The first is immediate and ordinary. It carries the memory of the wood's youth, the peat's long sleeve, the fat that jumps when a pot thinks too enthusiastically. It lands on skin and cloth alike, the way a story lands on all who hear it, and no one pretends to be surprised. The second life is structural. Smoke teaches the room how to organise itself. It rises until it remembers that warmth still clings to the beams, and then it spreads out in a slow braid, a grey ceiling that changes height with the fire's mood and the door's honesty. Above that line are rafters, hook, the occasional forgotten object. Below it is the country where the night actually lives. The smoke line is a parliament. Patrons vote with their lungs. Some sit where the haze barely scrapes their hair and accept the sting for the sake of privacy. Others prefer the clearer strip that runs between door and hearth and feel the draught like a signature on their skin. Most stake out the middle ground and adjust themselves by inches as the evening teaches them. Light and air make rules without writing them. People turn their bodies to guard what the light exposes. A man with something to confess leans forward so his own shadow keeps his mouth to himself. A woman totting up a ledger sits where the flames tremble makes her figures private to anyone beyond arm's reach. Those who hope to catch a liar choose a seat where the flicker will play over the face across from them and give away the small betrayals of blink and twitch. The keeper understands these geographies and edits them constantly with the movement of a candle or the opening of a shutter. Her authority travels on light. By brightening one table, she sanctions a conversation. By dimming another, she signals that the topic has overstayed. The walls help or hinder, depending on the night. Wattle and daub do not pretend to be stone. They breathe. They take in the damp of days like this and give it back in a cool exhale. When a shoulder falls against them in laughter or defeat, the wall receives rather than resists. It holds the warmth of bodies for a beat and then forgets, like a confidant with a decent manner. In some houses the plaster would carry frescoes or at least ambitious colour. Here the decoration is practical. Pegs for cloaks, a shelf for cups that need drying, a bracket for the spit that will do its labour on feast day. In the corner, a shutter has been trimmed so often it no longer meets its mate cleanly, and through that hairline a thin, honest thread of outside air sneaks in to argue with the smoke. The hearth is the room's son, but not a tyrant. People orbit it at distances chosen by their needs. The closest ring is the working ring. The boy, the pot, the woman with the long-handled spoon who steers the evening's flavour away from disaster. Their faces flush and sweat with a pride that does not need audience. The next ring is negotiation. Heat enough to loosen fingers that have been tight with cold. Light enough to keep ledgers civilised. Beyond that, shadows hold those in conversational truce with the day. We speak of circle, but the room's gravity is not perfect. Drafts shape it into ovals and commas. The door opens. The grammar changes. The sentence of the night bends. Low ceilings ask people to mind themselves. Pride learns to bow a fraction when passing under a beam that remembers taller men. Anger, too, must bend, because a full theatrical gesture would punish the actor more than the audience. Laughter faces the same rule and becomes something rounder, deeper. Shared from the chest rather than flung at the rafters. In a space that edits posture, tempers are translated. A boast shrinks to a story that fits in the air available. A threat looks around, measures the distance to the hearth. The door, the constable's chances of care, and recasts itself as silence. Even joy behaves. It sits closer. touches an elbow, offers a bite. If you place your palm on the table quietly, as if greeting a creature, you can feel the room as a set of pulses, the tremor of feet relocating farther from smoke, the thud as a jug return, half the weight it was, the soft hiss from the hearth when fat meets flame, the reed in the rushlight complaining before it remembers its obligations. These are small things, and yet together they say what architecture always says when it's honest. I am not decoration, I am behaviour. The space and its materials do not merely host the night, they choreograph it. There is a science here, even if no one in the room would call it that. The door is opened less or more depending on how far the smoke must be persuaded to clear. The cask is moved a hand's breadth one way to keep it from the line of draught that will put a bitter memory in the next pour. Someone, maybe the keeper, maybe her eldest, watches the ceiling and decides whether to post a candle nearer the dice so that luck has nowhere to hide. Everywhere are the small calibrations, as if the room were an instrument that must be tuned every hour. None of this is ceremonial. It is quiet work. It is what keeps the tavern from turning into weather again. In such life, in such air, truths present themselves differently. Confession is more likely just after wood is added, and before the smoke remembers its ceiling. Promises are cheaper in the bright moments, dearer when the lamp goes sullen. Apologies thrive near the wall where voices go to soften. Lies prefer the path between door and hearth, where the draught can carry them away before anyone has time to weigh them. This is not superstition so much as observation folded into custom. You will not find it written. You will find it enacted 100 times between dusk and the hour. The bell finally asks for mercy. The traveller's cup warms the hand though the drink has cooled. A small thing, but meaningful. Warmth from without teaches the blood to be patient. The eyes find their lane neither probing nor surrendering, and the lungs pick the part of the room they are willing to call home for an hour. The smoke obliges by being almost kind. The light chooses an angle that flatters the face without turning it into a billboard. Around, the ordinary play continues under the same physics. The room shaping the night shaping the people, and everyone pretending, for civility's sake, that the arrangement is accidental. Some places instruct with rules posted by the door. Here, architecture is the rule book. The door says pace yourself. The floor says plant wisely. The beams say mind your head and your pride. The lights say share your face when you choose. The hearth says we are together, or not at all. And the smoke, which has learned patience from centuries of evenings like this, says nothing at all. It simply draws a new lie, a little higher, a little lower, reminding everyone present that survival in such rooms is mostly a matter of breathing, with the place instead of against it. The floor tells the first truth because it cannot pretend. It is a palimpsest of footprints, of choices, of what the room is willing to forget, and what it insists on remembering. Packed earth carries the weight, rushes take the punishment. They began the season crisp and green, a little brave, and then settled into their vocation, to become a record. In the bands nearest the door, the rushes are flattened and glazed with the city's import grit. Street wash, the thin mud of lives lived outdoors. Near the hearth, they are dark, soft with spills and the fine ash that drifts like tired snow. There is a path not quite visible but unmistakable underfoot. The desire line from door to bench to hearth and back again. A chair leg has sketched a shallow constellation of ruts where someone fidgeted through a winter's worth of evenings. A child's game left a small crater of thumbprints that will fill and flatten by morning. All of it is time written in straw. No one in the room would call it forensic, but people read these signs automatically. A new arrival, alert and cautious, will stand where the rushes crackle dry and honest under their boots, rather than where they sigh with old disap. A keeper who knows her trade will rake a fresh layer over the treacherous spot beneath the dice table, not to deceive but to reduce the risk of a wrong step when tempers and feet move faster than prudence. When the floor begins to whisper too insistently of past mistakes, an odour that moves from tolerable to argumentative, there will be a changing or a turning. Some houses do it with the seasons, others a festival. Some when a neighbour with a good nose suggests the time has come. Nothing is universal. The point is not purity, it is truth. The floor agrees to carry what the night cannot carry itself, under the rushes. The dirt is fur, tamped by years until it feels almost like intention. If you kneel and press a palm to it, a rude gesture. So let us only imagine you would sense the cold logic of the earth. It is indifferent, and by that very indifference it is fair. The rich man's heel leaves no deeper mark than the labourer's. The floor believes in equality of pressure, and yet hierarchy appears in the patterns. The clean, quiet strip against the wall belongs to the cautious and the patient. It is where promises are shaped. The noisy, scarred patch near the centre tells of performances, boasts offered and reduced, stories polished against scepticism. The dark island beside the hearthfoot is the map of consolation. The bowls that tip and return are part of its weather. In each case, the floor knows who stood where and why, without learning anyone's name. Lift your eyes and the walls take up the story. They are not stone here. They are wattle and daub woven stakes, daubed with a mixture that few glorify and all depend upon. It breathes. This material, on wet nights, it drinks and grows cool to the touch. When the fire has been kind and the shutters honest, it exhales. The plaster coat is uneven in places, not from neglect, but from use. Shoulders find their favourite heights and round the edges. Benches lean too ambitiously, leave a careful bruise that someone later smooths with a handful of patience and a bit of lime. A good wall in a place like this serves as confederate more than guard. It receives the slumped back of a man unfastening his day, and it does not object. It holds the heat of a woman's shoulder, while she counts and subtracts and decides, and it does not repeat what it learns. Decor is not the point, though there are gestures. A strip of paint in a colour that used to be bold runs along a beam's meeting with the wall. A line may be painted for a festival and then permitted to stay because it became a memory. Pegs, more reliable than nails, hold cloaks and hats and the occasional tool that does not like sleeping on the floor. A shelf near the dry corner of the room airs cups after their wash, being a generous word for the careful swirl in warm water with a pinch of ash. Pots hang on iron hooks that keep them within the hearth's jurisdiction. Part functional array, part gallery of options for a better week. The walls also serve as notice board. A bit of parchment with a name and a date and a sum, a charcoal drawing of a direction to a cottage for those who cannot read the words. None of it is permanent, but the effect is continuity. Here and there, the daub has been repaired with a different hand, a different recipe, a different decades of weather. The colour shifts slightly, the grit under a fingertip changes, and the wall becomes a map of maintenance. You can tell when money was tight by the thinness of the lime. You can tell when the owner's cousin apprenticed to a builder by the neatness of a corner. These are not grand narratives, but they are human in a way that stays with you longer than any coat of varnish could. Even the cracks participate. They are not threats. Most of them, they are the wall's script. A cursive of settlement and season, of last year's frost and this year's patience. If you trace them with your eye, you will find the places where drafts are born, where the outside negotiates with the inside and wins just enough to keep everyone awake and honest. Higher still, and the rafters keep their own counsel. They are black and glossy with a kind of honesty. Smoke has told them what they are, night after night, and they have accepted. From them hang herbs, meat when fortune allow, and above all, the quiet machinery of the house. A pulley made from a repurposed wheel, a length of rope with 3 knots to mark where a pot should sit for simmer. For hold, for keep warm, an iron hook that once held a spit and now holds the lantern that keeps chance from cheating too boldly. These things are not ornament. They are reminders. Anyone who looks up can see the work that underwrites the room's comfort. If the rafters are tidy, the keeper is diligent. If they are cluttered with forgotten tools and sad bundles that never became meals, then thrift has turned sour or luck has been away too long. Rafters also broadcast policy. A house that welcomes musicians will keep a reclaimed corner up there where a drum can dry and a fiddle's strings can be protected from damp. A house that tolerates only the songs that rise by accident will insist instruments sleep elsewhere. In some towns, where regulations are particular and officials alert, a set of scales might hang in sight to prove honest measure, or at least honest intent. In others, the rafters carry the symbols of patrons who have gone, a broken wheel rim kept to remember a cartwright, a child's shoe tied to a beam with a wish that moved the room to silence when it was made. Superstition lives there, but quietly an old horseshoe, a sprig of something blessed on a day nobody wants to describe now. Whether these things work, or if anyone truly believes they do, is less important than the shared agreement to let them keep working. Together, floor, wall. Rafter the building teaches a literacy that patrons learn without schooling. A stranger will glance at the rushes and choose a seat that keeps him from seeming either timid or aggressive. He will glance at the walls to see whether the tavern is a place that remembers its repairs, a good sign for the fairness of its measures. He will let his eyes visit the rafters and take the temperature of the house's self-respect. If the ropes are coiled and the herbs hang in clean ranks, he will trust the pottage. If the hooks are empty and the black above looks neglected rather than seasoned, he will drink more slowly and stop earlier. These are not infallible guides, but they are better than guessing. Material also sorts people gently. Those who prefer to be watched choose a bench with a wall behind them, but a clear vista to the hearth. They can perform without fear of someone appearing at their back. Those who prefer to watch sit where the light makes others legible and themselves a little anonymous. Those who wish to be forgotten altogether test the rushes beneath the darkest beam and accept the cost in smoke for the benefit of privacy. The keeper, who has seen all configuration, edits as needed with the placement of a candle. the raking of rushes, the loan of a cushion that marks a place as temporarily claimed. In this way, social order grows from the grain of the bench and the grit underfoot rather than from any proclamation. If violence threatens, and in rooms like this it sometimes does, the building speaks again. The floor's uneven truth imposes balance. Those who rely on swinging wide learn humility when their boots skid on straw. The low beam that has taught pride to bow will teach fury to think twice. The wall, which receives shoulders gently, is not a friend to skulls. Even the rash understand this. Often the architecture has diffused trouble before anyone calls for the constable. A misstep slows the rush of temper. A bench edge checks a foolish advance. A curtain of smoke hides the expression that would have escalated quarrel. We need not glorify this. We only note that the room was designed for living, and living includes the management of heat as well as of hunger. When the door opens and a new draught draws across floor and wall and up to the rafters, all three elements revise their advice. The smoke line lifts, and with it, caution relaxes by a breath. The rushes rustle and the gamblers pause as if that sound were an omen. The herbs stir and give back a ghost of summer, a reminder that outside the wet night there are fields and cures and work that does not involve the counting of cups. The building keeps the ledger of these moments, even if no chalkboard shows them. It remembers through stain and polish and shine. It will pass on what it remembers to tomorrow's evening, which will arrive with its own feet and its own plans, and the room will make of them something it knows how to hold. We speak of people shaping places, and that is true. A shrewd keeper and a careful hand can turn four walls and a hearth into safety. But the reverse is also true, and perhaps more quietly powerful. Places shape people. The floor teaches patience. The walls tutor discretion. The rafters preach the gospel of preparedness and of storing good things within reach. In a world where weather and fortune spend their days practicing surprise, such lessons are not decoration. They are survival taught in the vocabulary of timber and straw, of lime and smoke, of the steady labour that keeps the night from winning. The room is not one thing, it is a small geography with borders drawn in light and hue. If you stood on the threshold and drew a map, the hearth would be the cardinal point, the bright certainty from which bearings are taken. The benches make rivers, the bar a war, and the private nooks the coves where small boats tie up when they do not want the harbour master to count them. People learn this map the way birds learn wind. They do not speak of it, except when they do by accident. I'll just sit back there, which is to say, I have business with shade and quiet. The hearth is a sage and a workshop in the same heartbeat. It claims the room in a circle that is never perfectly round because draughts and human bodies tug at its edge. A long-handled ladle knocks against iron. A spit idle tonight rests like a promise of feast days. A trivet holds a pot that has learned patience. In the glow, faces simplify. The fire gives everyone a small nobility, even when their hands are rough and their clothes say that money this week is a rumour. Stories prefer to be told here, not because truth is braver, but because attention is easier. One man, the kind whose voice knows how to keep a table, is telling about a barge stuck fast in spring flood and how the poles bent like reeds until someone thought to grease them with tallow. Do we believe him entirely? Perhaps not, but we believe the heat at our shins and the way the punchline finds its landing spot because light has softened the world to fit one man's rhythm. Beyond the hearth's circle, benches curve like low hill ridges, shaping paths between them where a boy can pass with 2 jugs and a careful face. Benches are democratic furniture until the night grows specific. Then they reveal gradients. The sturdy plank nearest the door is where shoulders pause with the weather still on them. Deals there are quick and small. The corner a bench under the beam that makes everyone duck imposes humility, and therefore sees less boasting and more practical talk. The bench that steals a little heat from both hearth and bodies carries tomorrow's plans. Who will meet whom at which gate an hour after dawn? And with what story, if anyone asks? The keeper refreshes these ridges without seeming to. A folded cloth here, a loaned cushion there, a jug posted like a flag to show the place is claimed for a meeting that has not quite begun. The bar, if we dare call the stout table, ooh. And its retinue a bar is not only where cups are filled, it is a customs house. Things come in from outside course. Rumour, dampened things go out, measured drink, permitted knowledge, a dry remark that says a line has been noticed and will not be crossed again. Behind the board is a wall of decision, a row of cups upside down to keep their brief cleanliness intact, a set of small measures in pewter, each ding an audit of past nights, a ledger with the evening's weather in numbers. The keeper's hand moves through this air with a choreography that would look like dance if it did not have so much arithmetic behind it. A man asks for more than is wise and gets exactly what is prudent. A woman asks for less than she can afford and receives a generosity the ledger can carry because the house knows what it's doing. When the street door yawn, the bar senses which pressure will arrive loud coin. Soft trouble, Plain rain and reassigns resources with a glance and a nod. Then there are the coves, the curtained alcove if fortune has stretched that far, or simply the shadow where the wall turns and the beam above throws a shelter of smoke. Here the talk is not necessarily wicked, but it is careful. A journeyman and a guild elder pick at a problem like men sharing a thorn, removing it a degree at a time. Two neighbours who spent a season feuding over a boundary share a dish and try on the courage of forgiveness with the safety of night around them. In one dim notch, a traveller with a cracked nail and steady eyes explains a road to a boy who tomorrow must carry a message farther than his legs have yet agreed to go. The lesson includes not just turns and trees, but where the ground lies to trap the tired, where to beg water without shame, where dogs bark and where they only watch. Crowd control is a phrase for officials. Here it is simply craft. The keeper edits flows with objects you would not mark as tools until you see them used. A bell is moved 3 fingers nearer the dice players. The sound of the clapper when someone misjudges the set down reminds the table that sound travels farther than luck. A candle is promoted from sulking to steady, and suddenly a conversation decides to wash its face and speak clearly. The door wedge is argued with, and the draught that whistled truth from reluctant mouths eases, making promises safer to pronounce. At a sign you almost miss, the boy changes his route so that he will pass between 2 men who need the interruption of a jug to finish insulting one another with dignity instead of fists. Light writes borders that no lawman could enforce better. The hearth's halo is a parliament where speech expects reply. The midroom penumbra is a market where obligation and favour change hands with little ceremony. The outer gloom is a chapel of private negotiations in a faith without a priest. Once in a while the categories blur. Someone drags a stool too far into the glare and discovers that their story shrinks when the room can see its seams. Someone else is coaxed closer from the shadows and finds that laughter, when worn for a few minutes in the public air, fits them like an old coat they'd forgotten they owned. The room wants balance, and the fire is its instrument, because the fire wants fuel, and fuel is what the night brings in, the form of people exercising their reasons to be here. Not all commerce is cup and coin. A spindle changes hands under the pretext of returning a borrowed shawl. A small packet of dried leaves with more reputation than flavour travels from palm to palm with the gravity we give to anything that promises relief. A scrap of parchment with a neat hand gives a poor man's son the beginnings of letters in exchange for carrying messages 3 evenings running. The bar knows about most of this and pretends otherwise until pretense will no longer do. When it will no longer do, a word carries across the room like a thread drawn tight and then release, and everyone chooses to have heard exactly as much as their conscience can carry without wobbling. The dice table is not the only stage, but it is the one that declares itself. Hazard tonight proceeds in a responsible key, which is to say the stakes are low and the outcome mostly pry. The players sit with their elbows in the geography of stalemate, at once adversaries and partners in an exercise that turns fate into something a man can look in the eye. Close to them, someone marks time with a quiet tap knuckle to wood like a metronome for luck. The house is not hostile to this economy. It simply insists that the river of cups must flow past it. Position matters. The dice live where the bench meets the aisle, so every throw nudges the night along physically as well as financially. There is a place for the pilgrim and there is a place for the local wait. The pilgrim prefers a line of sight to the door and a bench that does not ask for proof of belonging. Their pack rests between their boots where they can claim it without theatre. Their gaze is candid in the way of people who have been talking mostly to their feet. The local wait sits where he can be found without being fetched, a throne implicitly on loan from the room. He will answer questions no one else can, about where the road floods and which baker sells yesterday's loaves. But he will not be hurried. Between them, a plank's width of table makes a small bridge across which news crosses disguised as pleasantry. The keeper gives the bridge a cup and removes a complication before it can pretend to be a grievance. Watch long enough and you will see the room repairing itself while it operates. The boy sweeps a sleeve of rushes with his boot without breaking stride. A sliver of wood that would have injured a careless palm joins a pocketful of other hazards, waiting for the fire. A kink in the line at the bar is straightened by a single word, after said in a tone that means the line is more valuable than any one person in it. Even the hearth healed. A log is moved half an inch and the smoke line rises just enough to let a tired man relax his shoulders. These are not miracles, they are decisions dressed as reflex. Near the back, a table has the privacy of a well. Its voices drop into it and do not climb out easily. Here the things that cannot quite be said in the open are shaped into sentences that will pass in daylight. A plan to ask an alderman for mercy, a scheme to join a caravan if the price of salt holds, a confession about a debt that must be paid before it hardens into a reputation. When the room needs to, It lends this table a screen of laughter from a neighbouring bench. Cloak by cloak, the cover builds until the difficult words have finished their work and the speakers can rise with the faces that look only politely used. In this mapped country, the constable is almost unnecessary on good night. The room's physics and the keeper's practice keep the peace by keeping meaning moving. If anger finds a corner to collect interest, a candle appears and drains it of privacy. If boasting tries to swell large enough to tip benches, the draft reminds it to bow. The only true law is attention paid to how bodies and stories flow. When the bell finally surrenders a single note late, respectable, the room does not leap, it exhales. The hearth will quiet itself by degree. The bar will reconcile the day with its copy of the ledger. The coves will return their secrets, either lighter or heavier. To the night, our traveller has learned the map without tracing it. The cup sits where a hand can reach it without announcing thirst. The bench offers a view that is wide enough to feel among and narrow enough to feel safe. The hearth gives heat without demanding the full glare of company. The bar knows the face net, and the boy knows the rhythm of the empty cup. All the while, the nooks do what nooks do, make room for small courage. The night holds itself together on this map, and everyone present walks it like locals by the time the last log collapses into a red grammar of embers. Names matter because they promise different nights. The signboard outside is more than decoration. It is a contract written in pictures for a town that reads with both eyes and hands. An inn is a roof for travellers first, a public house second. It has stabling if there is luck. Real stabling with hay that smells of fields instead of corners that smell of last week. It has rooms above the common hall, not many, and not all with doors that shut politely. Some nights a curtain is the only courtesy between your breath and a stranger's. An inn knows the road. It expects baggage, wet cloaks, questions about distances, and the simple desperation of people who must sleep horizontal or lose tomorrow. A good one keeps a groom who can read a hoof the way a scribe reads a line. For stoned, for heat, for the story of the day, the innkeeper talks in roots and fees as easily as drink and stew. He has learned to price quiet. A tavern begins with wine, or the idea of it, even in places where barrels arrive tired, and the best they can do is a promise that this cup travelled farther than your feet did. A tavern sits slightly higher in the order of things, if only by manners. Its benches expect negotiations that want a clean board and enough light to tell whether the coin is clipped. This does not mean the room is fine, it means the room is a range. The cups match in spirit, if not in glaze. A measure sits where it can be seen by the eye that cares about being cheated. If the town has any sense of licensing, the tavern respects it out loud and cheats it only in the quiet ways all houses cheat, by trusting a regular's thumb to be honest when the pewter is busy elsewhere. Here a merchant can meet someone from the guild without insulting either man's dignity, and a letter can be written with an elbow's worth of privacy and a candle that does not sulk. An alehouse is smaller weather. It's the kitchen that grew a public door. It is less about journeys and more about neighbourhoods, the street's living room with a cask. The alewife's hands are the licence most evenings. Her reputation the only seal that matters. Children may pass through it at reasonable hours without anyone pretending shock, because supper and sale share timber and smoke. If a statute book somewhere says otherwise, the statute book is elsewhere. Here the drink is short-travelled and honest as bread. The talk is local, braided with errand. Who has hens gone broody? Which roof surrendered to last rain? Whether the miller has taken to skimming grain with a boulder cup. Payment is coin when coin is present, bartered when a neighbour's dignity prefers anything but being seen to come up short. The room does not expect anonymity, it expects memory. Prices live on a sliding board, few can swear to exactly. A cup of ale may cost a penny here and half there, depending on season. Distant, and the arithmetic of taxes that take their bite on market day and then echo through the week in cautious pause. Lodging at an inn can be a bed-shared bargain two in a pallet, if neither snores like a sinner escaping, or a dear mercy bought with silver when fever travels in town. What money buys is not only the object, it buys the angle of the candle, the steadiness of the floor beneath your sleep, the keeper's willingness to remember your name when someone else is looking for you tomorrow. Guilds and councils thread themselves through these rooms like a second set of beams, where statutes are strong. Ale is sold only in measures stamped with the town's mark, where statutes are weak. Trust and gossip do the measuring. Some places require taverns to close at a bell that rings more for the comfort of neighbours than for the souls of patrons. Other places look the other way so long as the constable can warm his hands discreetly and find a seat when the night asks more of him than walking. A traveller who keeps his ears open will hear when a licence has been renewed, because the keeper will polish the measure in public and let pride do its small shining. He will also hear when a fine has been paid, because the cups will grow careful for a week and the ledger will learn to frown. Beds are honest in their way. A rope lattice tightens beneath a mattress of straw. Sleep tight is advice, not poetry. Feather beds belong to the richer end of the road and the colder end of the calendar. And even then, a good feather bed is often a rumour spread by those who want the room to sound grander than it lies. More common are pallets stuffed with what the season offers. Chaff. Bearded barley that will tickle a dreamer's wrist. Clean straw if the harvest was decent. Sheets are rarer than promises kept through winter. And a blanket's virtue is measured less by its smell than by its stubbornness against draughts. Sharing is not scandal, it is economy. Men who would fight at noon will agree to divide a pallet at midnight because the body teaches what pride forgets. Warmth is a negotiator. Food draws its own borders between houses. At an inn, the pot aims to be generous because travellers remember cooking more sharply than they remember prices. An inn lives on road-worn recommendations muttered at crossroads and ferry steps. At a tavern, the table leans towards a variety when the road blesses the town's salt fish from a coast day's ride away. A cheese with a personality loud enough to argue with the wine. Onions that complete what would otherwise have been a grey thought. An alehouse keeps to the rhythm of a home. Pottage that knows yesterday. Bread that has a life outside the bench. A skillet that sings when there is something worth singing over. None of these are promises, they are tendencies. The weather has a vogue, as do ships, harvests, and wars being fought far enough away to be heard only in shortages. Notices change tone with the house. Inns speak the language of distance. A cart for hire to the next market town. A warning about a bridge that lost patience with last week's flood. A name written in a careful hand for anyone looking for a man who said he'd wait. Taverns keep a ledger of obligations slightly too large for a doorstep talk. A debt acknowledged. A partnership's terms sketched and then recopied tomorrow at the Guildhall when both parties have slept. Alehouses advertised by smoke and by habit. If you pass and the air smells lively, you know what you need to know. If you pass and the door is open but voices are quiet, it is a night for neighbours to solve neighbour problems without the law peering in. For all their differences, these places borrow from one another. A tavern will lay out pallets when the fare overruns the town and every stairwell turns into a negotiation with blankets. An inn will sell ale to men who have no travel in them at all, because draughts of company are as dangerous to a house as are draughts of grain. An alehouse will sprout a ledger during festival week, because credit and grace must be remembered when the dust and joy settle. The rooms learn one another's tricks the way fields learn to swap crops so the soil does not tire, so the people do not either. What should a cautious soul look for when choosing? Glance at the measures. If pewter sits where eyes can weigh it, the house means to be believed. Glance at the corner near the hearth where the ladle rests. A clean rim tells you the pot has a responsible mind. Smell, but not rudely. Sour is not sin. It is simply time doing its ordinary work. Rancid is carelessness. For a bear, listen. Rooms that sell sleep have a hush to them even when the common hall hums. Ask small questions and weigh small answers. A keeper who knows distances without thinking has served travellers more than once. A keeper who knows every neighbour's name is an alehouse wife, whatever the signboard claims. Our traveller, who has found a seat and a rhythm to the cup, understands now what the doorway promised. This house respects the town's rules enough to be trusted and bends them quietly enough to be useful. It is not an inn and will not pretend to be. The stables are 2 alleys over, and no one will volunteer to check your horse's shoes. It is not a kitchen with a public door, though the stew is as unashamed as any household's. It is a tavern that does its best with what the road and the river allow, and tonight that is enough. The room answers to wine when wine can afford to be here, and to ale when wine cannot, and to talk when both have had their say. You could bring a contract into this light and not insult it. You could bring a worry and not have it laughed at. You could bring an appetite and expect it to be taken seriously. When the bell in the lane calls a late hour, and the door lifts on its tired hinge to let in a last gust and a last pair of boots, the distinction blur the way smoke blurs rafters. Inn, tavern, alehouse, the night uses what it had. The roof holds, the cups do their work. The ledger keeps score in a hand that forgives as often as it insists. Tomorrow, a stranger will ask which house to try, and someone will describe this one in words that sound like directions but are mostly about trust. Names matter, but the better map is how a place holds you while you're here, and how kindly it releases you when the hour asks you to go. Thirst pulls the day along like a quiet rope, and in a town like this the rope is spliced from air. People drink because water can be an argument you lose without realising it. Wells stand where generations agreed they should, but agreements age. A cesspit creeps inward, one owner at a time. A tanner's rinse finds the ditch that finds the stream. A heavy rain persuades the street to share its news with the river. No one here speaks of microbes, they speak of outcome. The water from that pump gives the stomach ideas. Someone will say, and the phrase is warning enough. The remedy is old and practical. Boil the liquid, let life do some work upon it, and ask grain to shoulder part of the burden that used to be carried by saints. So the cup is not luxury, it is logistics. Morning begins with what they call small beer ale brewed weak on purpose, not because anyone loves thin flavour, but because bodies love routines that do not punish. The brew takes the heat, lifts a little bitterness from herbs or where custom and supply have married hops, then gives itself back to buckets and jugs without swagger. Children drink it because children must drink something. And small beer is safer than the brags of a well that hasn't yet apologised for last week. Labourers drink it because work asks for fluid and because a man who hauls timber through noon cannot also bear the tilt that stronger cups would lend his legs. Housewives drink it because the day is long and the kitchen is heat and steam. A swallow when the pot hisses is not indulgence. It is adjustment. Brewing is a domestic art that spills into commerce whenever a household learns its own genius. In many streets, the alewife is a kind of unofficial quartermaster. She turns barley and patience into the mild engine that runs a neighbourhood. The method is simple on paper and exacting in practice. Grain is soaked, convinced to think about growing, then halted at just the right moment and dry. Mash meets water that has met fire long enough to call itself honest. A dose of bitterness balances the sweetness of grain. Then the result is left to become itself in a clean vessel guarded against the kind of accidents that turn drink into sermon. The house that keeps its tub sweet and its measures fair will find coin and thanks at the door. The house that rushes the work will find a different sort of attention. Pursed mouths, rumours, the constable if he's been given reason. Taste lives on a spectrum that includes safety. A clever tongue can tell when a brew is too eager, green and pushy, or when it is lazed into sourness. But between those edges is the broad country where acceptable lives, ready, a little herbal, occasionally a whisper of apple if the cask once had other work. Even the watery end has its purpose. Not every errand requires flavour. A bucket of weak ale by the back door is a household's canteen, a way to keep the mouth from growing mean while the day rattles its demands. Custom teaches pacing. A teamster will begin with small beer at dawn like a man lacing his boots. Routine, necessary. Unremarkable, by mid-morning he may allow himself a cup with conviction behind it if the road has behaved. At noon, if there is meat and a patch of shade, he might test a stronger brew that admits it remembers barley more vividly. Then he returns to smallness in the afternoon, because wagons and pride both prefer straight line. Nights are another country, we will come to them. But the daylight hours are a treaty between thirst and duty, and the cup keeps the treaty honest. Water is not banished, it is curated. People learn which wells behave in certain seasons, which pumps prefer to be drawn slow, which springs feel insulted by too many hands. Some households keep a pot that makes steam daily, not only for soup but to supply the next day's brewing and the tea of herbs that stand in for medicine. In streets nearer the river you will see a caution that sounds like religion, but is only experience. Never bring the bucket after rain. Never trust the surface when the tide has an argument with the wind. The old stand at doorways after a storm and look at the colour of puddles the way shepherds look at clouds. What they are reading is not poetry, it is survival written in shallow water. Hop, where they have taken hold, change the arithmetic. They let drink travel farther in time and space without turning unfriendly. Bitterness is their price and their signature. Not every town loves them. At first, some palates are loyal to gruit, those herb mixes that give ale a quick brightness or a sleepy edge, depending on the hand that mixes them. In gruit you can find your sweet gale, sometimes something barky that remembers winter. The alewife who uses such herbs does so with the caution that comes from listening to neighbours sleep. No more than a pint, she will say, and mean both kindness and prudence. But over years, and depending on trade routes, climate and law hops arrive, and with them a flavour that a traveller from 2 counties over can recognise. Consistency is its own comfort. The church has opinion, as it does on anything that changes how people behave. Some days it denounces excess and calls for water and prayer. Other days it blesses the Brewers' Guild and drinks the cup at a feast, because feasting is one of the honest languages of relief. Fast complicate things, spices offer loopholes. Doctors write in Latin about humours and prescribe drinks warm or cool depending on the patient's season. Meanwhile, the street keeps score in plainer words. The house on the corner sells a cup that eases the throat without clenching the hands. The one in the lane leaves too many men quarrelsome by sundown. Morality here is mostly mathematics input. Outcome, the price of replacing a bench. Containers matter. Cooperage is a quiet profession with loud consequences. A well-made cask keeps truth. It does not leak. It does not lend the drink the ghosts of whatever lived in the wood before, unless those ghosts are welcome. Tavern talk about casks is as particular as sailors talk about hulls. This one breathes too much. A keeper will say and mean that evaporation is drinking profit faster than patrons are. That one sleeps, meaning the ale inside goes slack, so a careful house moves its casks with the seasons the way shepherds move flocks. A cooler corner for summer, a friendlier corner for winter, out of the draught if the cat has suddenly decided to sleep atop the lid. A sign that the spot is honest. Etiquette around the cup grows from risk management dressed as courtesy. You do not mock a man who chooses small beer all night if his work tomorrow matters. You do not insist a guest match you cup for cup unless you are willing to carry both his reputation and his body. Women drink without needing permission in most rooms like this, but the house protects them better if the keeper's gaze is the kind that can quiet a table with a lifted brow. To refuse a cup can mean prudent, not insult. To accept one can mean alliant, not surrender. The room understands these shades. It arranges light and distance to spare people from having to explain themselves with words they might regret. The poor are not excluded from drink, only from waste. A man with thin coin can buy a basin of mildness and make it last while he finishes an errand that required a roof and a face to witness it. A woman can order a cup and occupy a seat close enough to hear the news her household needs without spending the bread money. Children will be given sips ill because no adult wants to carry home a child fevered by water that argued with their belly. Does anyone pretend this is ideal? No, it is practical. Practical is what lets you see your neighbour next week. Not all illness comes from cups, not all cups cure, but a town with a living memory of bad water and a ledger of days saved by boiling and brewing writes its own policy on the matter. Officials may make rules about measures and closing hours. Guilds may form and argue about who may sell what from which abidor. Underneath it all is the consensus that thirst is not a moral failure and that a body offered a safer liquid will take it. A day's work is easier if the hand knows where to find a swallow that will not betray it. A night's talk is calmer when the fuel for speech does not set minds alight, faster than they can think. Near the end of evening, when the stronger cups begin to call their own tunes, you can see small beer doing its last service. It is the lane back down from altitudes, the gentler slope for men who have climbed higher than they planned. The keeper reads faces the way a pilot reads sky, and she will set an earthenware cup of mildness in front of a regulator, with the same unspoken authority with which she would slide a wedge beneath the door in a gust. He will drink it and call it a kindness. It is also policy. A house that lands its patrons on their feet will be trusted with their coin tomorrow. Our traveller, whose road has taught him more than one way to be thirsty, drinks within the treaty, a cup with the day's honest weakness when the hands still remember the reins, a more confident pour when the stew decides it, a return to smallness before the ledger closes. The knight thanks him by leaving his balance straight and his feet cooperative. Outside, the pumps clap, the river mutters, and somewhere a woman tips a kettle so that tomorrow's brewing will start with water that has already met fire. The town sleeps better for it, and the future wakes with fewer arguments already in its belly. Dough and drink share a grammar. Grain agrees to be transformed, and hands that know the verbs make meals and cups from the same sentence. In this town, hell still begins in kitchens where benches have heard lullabies and accounts alike. The brewer, the alewife in many streets, though the work can be anyone's, is part chemist, part weather reader, part neighbour. Her yard carries the architecture of her trade, a copper that remembers harvests, tubs scrubbed to a clean that smells of ash and thyme, a shelf where herbs dry in disciplined bundles so that their voices do not shout over the barleys. She wakes before the light can help much, because the work asks for decisions the day will later interrupt. Barley sometimes oat when barley is sulking, sometimes a mix when thrift and supply suggest it has been malted in the modest theatre of flaw and patience. The grain was soaked, spread, turned by hands that listen with fingers. When the husk split and an inner sweetness began to think about becoming leaf, heat stopped the thaw. That is the hint. Too soon and the cup will be thin memory. Too late and the cup will lurch, drunk on its own sugar. She knows this the way bakers know when dough has decided it will rise for them and not against them. This morning, the mash meets water that met fire a quarter hour ago, hot enough to persuade, not hot enough to punish. She stirs with a paddle darkened by 100 mornings. The house is quiet except for the wood's soft talk and the exact music of liquid thickening, as grain gives itself to the task. She tastes with a clean spoon, then tests with her hand, because temperature written on skin is more honest than temperature remembered from a story. There, she says to no one, and holds the heat steady. Steam climbs into the beam, and for a moment the kitchen smells like bread that has not yet decided its shape. Bitterness is the balance that keeps sweetness from lying. In older years and on older road, gruit stood ready, bundles of herbs gathered from edges where houses meet hedges, and marshes yarrow that knows how to be bold. Sweet gale from a world of water and burr, mugwort like a low song. The mix is not a recipe so much as a negotiation. The herbs must be clean, dried without greed so they do not carry the damp's gossip into the cup. A pinch warms, a handful lectures. Some houses learn to lean on gruit more than others. There are parish records and travellers' notes that speak of cups that ran a little hot in the head because someone seasoned with enthusiasm. Our brewer has no interest in testing the outer edges of sensation. She aims for steadiness, the kind of bitterness that makes the mouth honest. Not adventurous, so her fingers measure by habit, and the herbs enter like a considered remark. In some towns, hops have come to stay, and with them, a different arithmetic. Where they are planted in tidy lines up sturdy poles, their burrs catch summer as if they were designed to argue with decay. Boiled into the warp, they lend bitterness with a signature that a stranger can recognize, sharper, cleaner, a taste that repeats itself from batch to batch like a choir returning to the refrain. Hops allow beer to travel farther and last longer. They are an ally to those who trade and those who plan. But adoption is uneven, as all adoptions are. Law, taxes, guild monopolies, It is on gruit, local pride, and simple palate all join the debate. In this lane tonight, the cup we are likely to lift leans herbward still. The caravan from the hop country visits, but not often enough to make certainty a habit. Once the mash has surrendered what it can, the liquid is drawn off bright enough to catch a bit of light and be called wort. It returns to the kettle and is boiled until impatience stops making sense. The herbs or hop, when they appear at times the brewer can explain but prefers to feel. Boiling cleanses as well as cooks. What was risky becomes less so. A child pads into the kitchen because children always sniff their way toward future comforts. The brewer sends them to fetch the scrubbed tubs and a length of cloth that has been hung for this day alone. When the boiling is done and the liquid has learned what it needed from heat, it rests and clears until the air forgets its urgency and the hands around the kettle forget to flinch. The transfer is the moment where sloppiness would spoil a week. The tubs must be sweet being the house word for clean enough to host a living thing without scaring it. She rinsed them last night, hung them where smoke could touch and flies could not, and now the cloth filters out whatever the boil persuaded to abandon the journey. Yeast, though. No one here calls it that, with a scholar's neatness waits in a heel saved from the last good batch. A spoonful of yesterday's miracle used like a blessing. It goes in with the quiet ceremony these houses reserve for anything that turns one thing into another. Bread, drink, forgiveness, fermentation begins like gossip. Invisible, then suddenly everywhere. The tubs are moved to a corner that keeps its temperature like a promise. Cats are discouraged. Children warned by a story about a careless boy and a ruined brewing that may not be strictly true but is serviceable. By afternoon, a skin of noise covers the house, bubbling like a small spring that forgot its place. The brewer watches without interfering much, except when a tub seems sulky and needs a warmer wrap, or overeager and needs to be reminded that time is the partner here, not the enemy. The smell shifts from hot grain to something rounder, a sweetness folded with a grassy bitterness. If gruit was used. The kitchen carries a hedge's memory, a clean wildness. If hops, a sharper perfume lays a bit of order over the air. There is a world of difference between ale that has finished its thought and ale that is still arguing with itself. A careful house waits just long enough. Too soon and the cup will be breedy and green, a little sulky. Too late and sourness crosses from honest to sullen. The alewife errs on the side of charity. Better a day of patience than a week of explanation to neighbours who have paid in coin and trust. When she draws the first test mug, she lets it settle, and then tastes like a judge with a good reputation, no theatrics. Just the verdict on whether this will be sold with pride. If the answer is yeah, she begins to rack into clean casks, each marked so she can remember which corner they prefer and which customers will love which shade of bitterness. The work moves from kitchen to street by degrees. A sign subtle, learned by the town's eyes, goes out. A broom leaned head down by the door, a sprig tied with twine to the lap. Smoke that looks like a certain shade of satisfaction rather than mere heat. Regulars arrive with their own measures because the shorthand of trust is convenient for both parties. The constable may pass, not because law must hover, but because law is thirsty like any man who walks a beat. On good days he buys and nods at the stamped measure in public view. On other days he glances at the casks and chooses to imagine all seals in order, because the piece has cost him more energy than the town has paid him this week. Caution lives in the margins of this tray. Herbs with reputations are kept to a thumb and two fingers measure. Any plant that asks the mind to climb too high is left to the physicians and their Latin. Seasons change the recipe more than fashion does. Winter asks for rounder cups. Summer for a bitterness that dries the mouth without souring the mood. If sickness travels, and some years sickness travels like a rumour with legs, the brewer will boil longer and clean more fiercely. Bowls and cups are scoured with ash and a kind of bone-deep attention that remembers loss and does not care to host it again. You will not see fear, you will see industry. Women who sell ale develop eyes that run on two ledgers at once, the coin in the cup and the reputation that pays dividends slowly. If a man grows loud, she moves the candle. If he grows louder, she moves his friends. If he grows louder still, she moves him toward the door with a courtesy that has weight in it. Her authority is the room's safety wearing an apron. It is also her own safety, and she is not naive about that. She arranges regulars like furniture, so that any hand that thinks to be bold finds two cooler hands already between it and its project. The town knows this choreography. It honours it by pretending it happens by accident, by evening. The day's ale has reached the tavern we've been inhabiting, or the tavern's own casks have come alive for the house's use. Depending on which enterprise owns the kettles, cups travel. A man who was shy of bitterness now tells anyone within courteous radius that he has learned to like the hops bite, because it keeps him from wanting a third cup he cannot afford. A woman praises gruit not as a philosophy, but because the marsh and a good herb tastes like home and childhood air. Palates are politics of a gentle sort. They announce where you were raised, which road you travelled, where your wages think they belong, and yet the main truth refuses to be fashionable. Hot water met grain, patience met chance, bitterness met sweetness, care met thirst. That is the recipe, with dates and doctrines as variation. The night we're in owes more to hands than to rules. If tomorrow a new herb arrives tied in a neat bunch from a cousin 2 parishes distant, it will be tested with respect. If next month a man who once brewed in hop country marries into this lane and brings with him a preference for cones and trellises, the town will weigh his cups and make up its mind with tongues rather than pamphlets. Our traveller lifts a drink that is less philosophy than comfort, and finds in it the steadiness that allows other decisions to be made. The cup tastes of fields and a little of hedge, of work and a little of experiment, of this street and the next parish over. It's not the finest cup ever brewed, and it does not need to be. It is a companionable truth poured into clay. When the traveller sets it down, the rim leaves a ring on the wood that will dry into nothing and yet remain as part of the ledger. The room keeps of quiet satisfactions. There is a kind of ambition in a cup that has travelled. Wine arrives speaking in distances, and even when the road has shaken it into a humbler register, the first sip still carries the quiet of hills that this town does not owe. It reaches the tavern by river and cart, by backs and bargain, and it keeps a little posture even after the cork or whatever honest stopper the cask knew has been traded for a spigot. In a room that smells of smoke and barley, wine is a visiting cousin who wears a different cut of cloth, not always grand, but different enough to be a subject. The tavern treats it accordingly. The measures for wine sit where sight can weigh them. Pewter bells and cups with their rims trued by a careful hand. A candle keeps watch nearby because wine prefers to be read as well as poured, its clarity tested against flame, its honesty checked for seeds of trouble. The keeper leans toward a ritual here, not out of stubbornly, but because ritual is a kind of insurance. A clean cloth stands ready to wipe drips that would invite flies or bicker with the smell of stew. The cask lives in shade, away from the hearth's breath and the door's moods. A wedge under one end teaches sediment to mind its corner. When a cup is drawn, it is done with an attention that tells the room, this costs more because it asks more. Taste writes maps the tongue can follow, a thin white that remembers river stones and clean mornings, a red with a memory of barns and late summer, something somewhere between, steady as bread. Quality is a negotiation between source, season, and how well the road behaved. Bad luck can happen. Heat that made a cask sweat into sourness. A careless cooper who let the wood gift splinters of sap where none were invited. A merchant who stretched honesty with water or spice. These are known risks, not secrets. Towns learn the reputation of cellars the way sailors learn winds. From the southern road, after rain that phrase tells a keeper to buy lighter and serve sooner. From the hill country, blessed be the muleteers that tells her the cup will stand up to a second look. Mead takes a different path to respect. It is less travelled and more tender. Bees working fields and hedger, keepers working patience into honey until it becomes something that warms without insisting. In some households, mead is seasonal ritual, a winter kindness brought out with a care that wakes old songs. In others, it is the drink for a marked day, a wedding cup that smooths new names into one ledger line. The tavern does not keep mead in quantities that would embarrass it. Honey is dear, and the work behind it more delicate than barley's. But a small cask might live near the keeper's ledger like a savings box. When a patron asks with the right mixture of modesty and purpose, is there any of the sweet? The answer, if it is yes, is given in the measures that honour both the bees and the need that prompted the request. Mead tastes of summer even when the lane outside is iron with frost. And this is not nothing. Cider and perry speak the language of hedgerows and slope, where orchards lean against the town's shoulder. Autumn teaches more than one kind of harvest. Apples sorted by personality, pears that require a patient wrist, bins scented with bruised sweetness and leaf, presses cree, and the first runnings are drunk with a pleasure that listens for seeds and pulp and decides to forgive them. By the time jugs reach a tavern, the liquid has settled into itself. Cider wears a tartness that wakes a mouth without picking a quarrel, whereas can be shyer, greener around the edges, a secret that opens slowly. In years when the fruit is generous, the tavern's back corner smells like a cool version of sunlight. In lean years, the town drinks memory and calls it hope. Storage is a craft, and the cellar is the craftsman's bench. Step down and the air changes from talk to stove. Here the tavern's future waits on shelves and planks, in casks that bulge with contentment or sulk with strain, in bottles kept for the sort of person who will ask for them softly. The floor is honest dirt tamped to firmness. The walls are damp in the clean way of earth that resists rot. A good cellar keeper knows every microclimate by feel, the corner that breathes, the ledge that stays cool through the week's temper, the place where mice once tried to declare a republic and were persuaded back into private life. Chalk marks on staves remember when to turn or draw. A slate by the steps holds little sums that add up to continuity. Fraud exists because scarcity invites invention. The room knows the signs without making a thesis of them. Wine that stings like a reprimand instead of finishing like a thought may have been convinced to stretch with river or well. Cider that tastes of cinnamon in a season when no cinnamon passed through market may have been asked to dress better than it can afford. Some houses preach, some houses shrug. This house prefers the practical remedy. Buy from hands you can find again. Keep your candle near. Let taste be the magistrate and memory the bailiff. A customer who brings a complaint is answered with a fresh cup and a quiet note in the ledger. Do not buy from this man again until his stories improve. Status flutters around these drinks like a modest banner. Wine calls certain company out of the woodwork. A parish clerk who likes to cite Latin that never said what he pretends. A merchant who measures reputation by import distances. A widow with a practical inheritance who wants to keep her head clear while the table argues about lumber. Mead draws quieter faces, or faces made formal by occasion. Cider and perry gather those whose hands carry orchard scars, and those who envy them in the lifeless months. Ale flows between all these like a river among fields. It is the common denominator that lets pride rest. Tonight, our traveller watches these as mathematics and sees something finer than hierarchy. A room mapping appetite to circumstance without insulting either. The bar performs a different dance when wine is in season. The measure is shown openly, then filled in sight with a steadiness that says this house knows both mercy and arithmetic. A small dish of salt rests near the cup, not because wine needs it, but because drinkers do salt wakes a tongue and steadies a stomach. And the keeper would like tomorrow's dawn to arrive kind. Trenchers carry cheese with personalities sharp, bold, the sort that keeps talking after the bite finishes because wine prefers conversation. Bread is cut thinner, apples sliced instead of handed whole, a small economy that also keeps hands tidy. These are not luxuries, they are manners that help a dear drink keep its dignity. Talk shifts timbre with these cup. Wine lends a patience to speak. A willingness to hold a thought in the mouth and turn it. Agreements written in wine-light tend to carry clauses instead of boast. Mead softens edges that would otherwise scratch. It is a solvent for old grievances when used with care. Cider and perry quicken the pace a little, like rain tapping at a window when work must still be done. Ella returns to bind the evening to its practical rails when any of the others threaten to drift. The keeper, who has no interest in metaphors but every interest in outcome, moves stock and candles to mat. One cask nearer, another a pace away, the brighter lamp over the table where two men are counting how to forgive each other without losing face. Not everyone can afford a night of wine, and not everyone wants one. The room protects them from feeling poor. The man with an ale will not be hung out in the bright to mark his choice. The woman with cider will not be asked if she would not rather drink something with a wider reputation. Custom here is polite to means one of the reasons this house keeps its customers. On feast days, when a small surplus swims through town like a school of glittering fish, the keeper might post a sign that says a half measure of wine can be had for an honest penny, and a promise to bring back the cup. Chipped though it is, before the bell, it is not charity, it is alignment. A house that gives many a taste today will find many a regular tomorrow. Transport has its own folklore. Sailors swear by casks that rode low in a calm. Carters curse those that bounced on frozen ruts and turned skittish. Men who rack wine tell stories about candles and breaths held and the right shoulder to use on stair turns. Cider men wrap barrels with straw ropes so that a slip will not mean a ruin. Bees are included in the toast when mead is drawn. Because they worked while men argued, it might be superstition, it might be gratitude. Rooms like this prefer practices that behave like Beau, our traveller, who has lived on bread and ale long enough to have earned curiosity, buys a small cup of the wine the keeper names without fuss. From upriver, not proud, not shabby, it is honest. It begins like a conversation with someone who notices more than they admit. It finishes without taking anything it did not bring. The next cup is cider, because the traveller prefers to spend coin like steps one toward, one across, one home. It tastes of leaf and a little of sun behind cloud, and for a moment the rain outside seems like patience instead of persuasion. Later, when the stew has done its good work and the ledger is closing over the evening's arithmetic, a neighbour sends a sip of mead as thanks for a small favour given without receipts. It warms exactly the way the old songs say it should, which tonight is proof enough. By the time the bell offers its thin admonition, and the candles begin to behave like old men, the room has poured its spectrum without losing its balance. Wine told a few truths carefully, cider reminded the mouth of orchards, mead carried a ceremony across an ordinary table, ale kept everyone knitted to the floor. No cup overruled another. The night's talk made sense. The house will sleep with its casks where they belong, and its ledger in a hand that can stand behind its sums. Outside, the river considers what it carried in and what it will take away. Inside, the last ring on the wood dries to a pale circle. A moon you could miss if you did not know where to look, and the room remembers, as it always does, how to be generous again tomorrow. The room eats from one pot and a dozen habits. Supper is not a parade, it is a practical treaty between hunger and means, negotiated in ladle. The pottage has been working all day, which is to say it has been folding hours into itself until barley and root no longer remember who began the conversation. On a good night, the pot is closer to a chorus leeks and onions humming under the barley's steady line. A turnip or parsnip offering its white kindness. A handful of greens put in later so they keep their colour. If fortune has passed by in the shape of a bone, the broth knows it without boasting. If fish trimmings were honest today, the pot learned a little of the river. What matters is warmth that does not startle the stomach and a thickness that keeps a spoon occupied. People judge a house by this pot more than by its cups. The drink argues about taste, the pottage argues about care. Bowls arrive that know teeth and spoons arrive that know silent. Wood is the material of patience, and the tavern has learned to prefer it. A pewter spoon is a fine thing, but a wooden one asks less of your purse and of the fire that cleans it. Trenchers are bread cut thick enough to count as furniture. They begin the night as plates and end it as food sourced by the meal they just supported. Their bottom crust softened to something the poor will be glad to carry home, or the house will be glad to reboil. Wheat is gentility, rye is honesty, Maslin the mixture the market taught. Of wheat with rye or barley sits everywhere in between. A size men in some towns test the loaves for fairness, not to flatter anyone's tongue, but to keep bakers' profit from eating the hungry. Bread is judged not only by taste, but by weight, and a loaf that keeps its promise is a form of public safety. Cheese is the temper between seasons. Fresh curds are on a spring, tender. A little squeak to them, a bright salt that teaches the tongue to pay attention. As months lean on milk and the wheel dry, cheese becomes counsel firm, sharp, a way to make a poor stew stand up and introduce itself. Households that keep animals calculate fate in cur, a goat that will give, a cow with her moods, a shepherd's bargain, a rush mat laid for dry. The tavern slices thin when coin is thin, it shaves righteous portions when a patron has done the room a practical kindness. A wedge set beside a cup of wine does the work of a small speech about hospitality, without making anyone listen longer than they planned. Meat is not a guarantee, it is a punctuation mark on fast days, which are many if the church keeps a strict calendar here. The pot leans riverwards or toward garden and grain, and no one calls that poor only obedient, thrifty, and often delicious if the cook is clever. On meat days, scraps and stocks from yesterday's more fortunate tables become today's depth. Sausage exists because thrift is an art, bacon exists because time can be taught to do part of the labour of flavour. Salting is the old magic, and salt is dear because it lets winter sit at the same table as summer without argument. Smoke is the other magic, a rack near the hearth that looks like storage is in fact a ledger of future meals. Strips and slabs that have learned patience, lengths of fish that have agreed to become their own umbrellas against decay. None of it is spectacle, it is insurance you can taste. Fish tells you where you are in the year, and how honest the roads have been. In towns with a river relationship, eels are thick ropes of calories that make sense of cold months. Herrings arrive, salted from places the traveller can name on his fingers. Stockfish, hard as intention, becomes its best self only when a cook has time and a secret she learned from an aunt. A tavern keeps the better part of this out of sight because seeing storage makes people imagine abundance in a way that is not helpful to anyone's temper. But in the bowl you will taste careful travel. A slice gentled by poaching, a shred redignified in a stew, a broth clarified not for elegance but to keep a sick man's stomach from arguing. Greens do the work of health without writing pamphlets about it. Cabbage, kale, beet tops when the root has already done its duty. Sorrel to point the tongue toward brightness again. Nettles handled with respect so that sting changes into nourishment. In summer, peas that pop like small agreements. In winter, dried peas that keep their own counsel until the pot persuades them. Herbs are the house's signature. Parsley in the generous months, time when a sprig can be spared from the bundles overhead. Sage that insists on being noticed. The seasoning is not an attempt at show. It is the ancient wisdom that food tastes kinder when it tastes of itself, plus one thought. Acid is a quiet ally. Vinegar made from wine that wanted a second career, or from cider that took a philosophical turn, wakes stew the way a draught wakes a roux. Not to scold but to move things along. The juice, when the orchard allows it pressed from unripe grapes or crab apples, does finer work. All lift and no quarrel, a way to keep a sauce from becoming a sermon. Pepper is a coin you sprinkle rather than spend, and saffron, in his hounds that know the colour, is a Sunday conversation. Ginger and cinnamon wander through on feast days not because anyone wants to make the pot foreign, but because their warmth has a reputation for encouraging tired bodies and impressing guests. A tavern does not traffic in exotica as identity, it uses what arrives to make the local self more itself. Cleaning is not a footnote, it is a theology. Bowls are rinsed, then scoured with ash in a movement that means it. Cloths are boiled like enemies and then forgiven into usefulness again. Cutting boards, if the house is lucky enough to distinguish them, carry different history, one for bread and cheese, another that remembers bones with tact. The ladle lives where steam can keep it honest. Knives are sharpened with attention because dull knives do cruel work, and the house does not permit cruelty even to carrot. A cat patrols. A boy learns that rinsing is not the same as clean. You will not see banners, but you will see discipline. Credit moves through the kitchen as well as the bar. A woman can pay for a bowl with a morning's help when the keeper's sister is laid up. A man can sit near the hearth and eat what the trencher left behind if he agrees to carry in wood for a week. The room remembers these bargains not with pity, which sours quickly, but with the practical accounting that keeps both giver and taker unembarrassed. The chalk on the board registers coin and kindness in different columns that end in the same decency. A keeper who understands this arithmetic keeps regulars. Portions are all... The first ladle is generous enough to convince hunger it has been seen. The second, when asked for, is measured against the room's needs. Children who have behaved find an extra carrot in their bowl. A man who has talked louder than his share receives exactly as much as is fair, and no more, and the fairness which is better than a speech. When the pot is nearly done, its last depth is not wasted. The house will turn what remains into tomorrow's beginning. Because continuity is a flavour all its own, the perpetual pot is not myth so much as method, a memory kept warm, revised daily, always moving towards a comfort. At table, pottage becomes conversation. Spoons find a pace that matches story. Steam makes a privacy curtain around small disclosures. A pair of carpenters calculates a beam by eye and appetite. A pilgrim asks if the shrine road is muddy beyond the mill, and is answered with directions hidden in a recipe's aside. Salt passes with the same solemnity as news. When someone thanks the house with a simple, "that will do," the phrase carries more praise than any flourish, because that will do is how you bless work done for the sake of keeping people human. Hunger can make a town mean, supper makes it reasonable again. The tavern understands this and runs the kitchen like a civic office without a seal. It gathers what the fields offered, what the river confessed, what the market muttered, and it translates those into warmth. The result is not glamour, it is something better for nights like this. Steadiness that can be eaten. When our traveller finishes, there is the small, good heaviness that tells the legs they will walk home fair and the heart it will not make trouble. A heel of trencher, saved for later or given to a pocket that will carry it down the lane, is the signature at the bottom of the meal's letter. As the bowls stack and the steam thins, the kitchen tidies itself into the shape that morning will need. A cloth is hung where smoke can teach it patience. A pot is pulled to the hearth's cooler edge to fall asleep without sulking. Herbs are counted, not because scarcity frightens the house, but because abundance needs management. The cat accepts a lesson in manners and a small fee. The boy watches the last glow on the ladle and understands, before he could put it into words, that most of keeping people alive is repetition done kindly. The door lifts and another gust brings rain that has learned new jokes from the gutter. Someone comes in with a face that admits to a long day. The keeper nods toward the kitchen the way a mother nods toward a crib. The ladle rises. Hunger unclenches. The night, having made its case for cold and damp, loses the argument with a bowl. People do not come to a tavern as types. They arrive as errands wearing faces, yet patterns gather like steam, and if you sit long enough with a steady cup you will learn the town's roster without anyone announcing it. Merchants enter as if the air had numbers in it. Their hands speak before their mouths do one palm-held level, measuring, the other coaxing invisible columns to reconcile. A good merchant smells faintly of travel even if his boots show any city mud. The ghost of spices handled 2 stalls over, the beeswax from a pack that saw raid, the clean tang of new hemp rope. The cloth at his cuffs tells one kind of truth. The polish on his belt buckle tells another. He sits where light is cooperative and drafts are not, because ink hates surprises, and so does money if he has an assistant. That young man watches the room like a ledger in 3 dimensions. Who owes who? Who nods and means it? Who nods and is merely rehearsing? They drink ale that does not nag the head and wine when a contract is a guest at the table. Their talk is not loud because profit hates to shout, but when a deal lands you can hear it nothing more than a spoon set down just so, the universal punctuation of relief. Across from trade sits labour, not as an opposite but as a reciprocal. Guild hands from the carpenters share a bench whose surface they cannot help evaluating. Their fingers test joinery through habit, their eyes find whether a leg is in true without meaning to be unkind. They are men who keep their hats near because a working hat is a mat, to sweat, to sawdust, to a sun that respected hard work today. A mason's laugh carries pebbles in it, and he cannot prevent his palm from blessing a wall as he leans back. A cooper drinks with the patience of someone who knows a 13-hoop day is a test of more than muscle. They talk work because it is a language as rich as any. Timber, lime, grain tightener, who will be hired for the abbey extension, whose apprentice learned to read drawings instead of only copying hands. They drink slowly, not from virtue, but from weariness that wants the night to last long enough to turn into ease rather than sleep. They do not boast much. Their pride arrives in the way a sentence about a beam carries a softness at the end. Like a hand placed gently on completed work. Soldiers are another weather. Some are between wages and speak like men who have learned to pack light even in their mouths. Their cloaks advertise past employments by the quality and pattern of patches. A bit of foreign cloth sewn with domestic thread. A dyed strip that once belonged to a captain's tent. Leather from an old scabbard pressed into service as an elbow rescue. They sit where they can see the door, not because they expect trouble, but because they would rather know than guess. They drink in steps with the night. Something calm while they decide whether to talk. Something stronger if the bench has become a small continent of memory. And water-boiled, flavoured with a squeeze of sour when the talk has done its work and they would like to wake without shame. They offer news without dates attached. Roads, rumour of a levy, the price of fodder near the bridge. They tell one another's jokes with the careful tenderness men use for things that might break. Pilgrims wear dust like a uniform. They have a learned politeness, an ability to be present without insisting that makes rooms kinder. A pilgrim's pack is both weapon and evidence. On top, the small things that have earned their place by utility. Underneath, a tangle of what the road taught them to regret bringing. They sit in positions where a good soul can see that their boots are cracked. This is not manipulation. It is literacy and charity. When they drink, they keep their cups near the pack strap by reflex, as if ale was something that could run away down the road if unlaced. Their talk arrives in vignettes rather than speeches. A bridge that makes a song in a north wind. A hedge with sparrows that taught the heart to hold steady. A shrine where the light came through a window at the exact angle needed for doubt to remember it was only another weather. The room listens because pilgrimage makes even staid men feel a little travel inside. Apprentices are the young wing of the night. They come in pairs or threes and carry their master's shop in their hands. The ink not yet sanded from the thumb, the faint nick at a knuckle where a blade taught a lesson. A smudge that admits to charcoal. Their faces are both careful and eager. The tavern is school without a master here. They hear the unprinted version of the craft. A weaver's boy learns which dyer cheats absent-mindedly and which cheats with principle. A baker's girl finds out why the miller's tolerances matter when the river sulks. They drink mostly small beer, share a trencher as if it were a diagram, and when they laugh they check to make sure it fits the room's scale. An older journeyman will fold them into a bench's quiet authority if he approves of their posture. Authority here is bestowed in inches, a closer spot to the hearth one week. The right to ask a question next. Clergy come in ways that disappoint caricature. A parish priest who knows the names of the dogs on his street keeps a corner at a decent hour. Nursing a cup as if it were a psalm steady, thoughtful. No flourish. He listens more than he speaks, which makes him braver than men who thunder. On fast nights he minds his menu, but he minds it without making a parade of virtue. When widows bring questions that are not theology, how to coax the baker into fairness, how to ask the alderman to remember mercy without insulting his pride, he answers with a seriousness that respects the world as it is. A canon from the chapter house might appear now and again. An educated man who reads wine as easily as Latin, he is a danger to privacy if untrained, but a blessing if wise. This house prefers the second sort and has learned to trim the candles near him until his category of clerical talk becomes human. Then there is the local gravity, the men and women whom the room revolves around quietly because they have been constant long enough to become furniture, the midwife who sits with her back to the wall and whose hands teach cups to behave, the miller's sister who remembers debt and goodness with equal precision, the old thief who is mostly retired and mostly harmless, who knows which gate squeaks and why no one should use it unless they want everyone to know. They are the tavern's archive. A newcomer who thinks history is only kept in parchment has not yet learned to buy these people a cup and ask the right courteous question. They keep storms from forming simply by bringing weather reports disguised as gossip that has had the venom taken out. Foreigners, meaning anyone who pronounces the town name in a way that makes locals blink, arrive with both risk and refreshment. A Frisian sailor will try to teach a song in a rhythm the hearth cannot keep and be forgiven for the attempt. A Breton peddler will make a circle of hairpins on the table and trap coin for an hour before releasing it again for the price of a tale. The room adjusts. It moves the candle so accents are lit warmly. It minds small insults the way a careful cook minds a simmer. Close attention prevents boiling. From strangers come herbs nobody had a name for yesterday. A new way to braid rope. A rumour about the price of wool that will not sit still next spring. The tavern likes to harvest such weather without letting it uproot anything. Women arrive as themselves rather than as a single story. Some come to collect husbands who have misjudged the night, and they can do so without being unkind to the room. Some come to close their own ledgers with a cup and the sort of talk that keeps a household viable. Some come because the house is safer than a kitchen for an hour, and because privacy wears better in shadow than on a doorstep. They find each other's eyes and make an invisible bench across the room when needed. The keeper protects this with a casual ferocity that no one mistakes for anything but policy. A man who disrespects that bench will find his cup replaced by a bill, and his next visit negotiated with the constable. Risk sits at every table but rarely gets the chair. Debt leans in, disguised as a joke about tomorrow's opportunity. Pride tries to buy a round it cannot afford and finds the ledger leaning back. A traveller with more charm than coin attempts to pay for news with flattery and learns the housewaite's favour over word. The tavern manages these troubles with an evenness that comes from practice. A hand rests on a wrist at the right moment. A joke that could sour becomes a parable with its teeth removed. The dice table is moved half a yard because luck behaves better when it has to walk around a chair. News is the other drink. A bag of letters bumps a messenger's hip, but the room drinks a different kind of post. Prices fell at the river stair. The abbot's physician bought saffron. The west gate creaked at noon. The alderman's boy was seen at the smithy, looking curious. None of this is owned, all of it is accounted. A world is built from such small stone. The merchant listens with one ear, the mason with the other, and the soldier braids both into a map that will matter when the road calls again. A pilgrim hears of a bridge out and changes a prayer discreetly from thanksgiving for stones to patience for detours. There is comedy, because survival enjoys laughter when it can afford it. A cobbler discovers that a wary customer's foot is smaller than his apology, and recalculates both. A teamster finally admits that the mule knew the ford better than the map. A clerk confesses to miscopying a number that made a saint's feast day march backward a week in the parish book, and the priest laughs first to save the clerk's job. The room enjoys these without cruelty. It has no time for cruelty. Cruelty ruins trade and sleep equally. Our traveller sits inside this parliament of appetites and occupations and learns the night's curriculum by osmosis. The cup keeps its level. Bread supports the elbow of a thought that might grow into a plan. The bench accommodates two strangers who will not be strangers next market. The keeper watches with a gaze that carries both welcome and boundary. And the boy ferries jugs with the apprentice stride of someone learning to be useful to a world that will always be thirsty and always need news. Nothing grand happens, and therefore everything important does. People remember how to belong to one another without oath. When the bell hints at lateness and the smoke writes a lower line, the room's cast begins to peel away merchants to their sum, labourers to their sleep, soldiers to the door that faces out, pilgrims to the one that faces tomorrow with the gentle choreography of a place that knows why it exists. The last thing our traveller notices, before the door lifts and the night claims its rights again, is the way the ledger at the bar holds more than number. Next to a column of coins are marks that are not quite letter. They stand for favours, for messages relayed, for the way a bench was returned to friendliness after a quarrel. It is a bookkeeping of decency, which does not erase debt but keeps it from turning into quarrel overnight. In a world with weather like this, such arithmetic is not romantic. It is infrastructure. The room will open tomorrow on the strength of it. Women keep the rooms balanced the way a keel keeps a boat's mostly unseen unless you look for it, unmistakable when you do. The keeper. If this is her house, or if the house is her husband's in a ledger, but hers in the hours that matter, moves through the night with the kind of authority that does not need height. She is a hand on the hinge, deciding how wide the door breathes. She is the small arithmetic that keeps a statement from turning into a quarrel. You could miss it if you stare only at cups and coins, but watch the way a candle is trimmed after she glances at a table. Listen to a tone softened by a single word delivered like a folded napkin. See a boy change his path so that a bench of men must lift their elbows, and, in lifting, forget to be angry. That choreography has a name, and it is hers. Her ledger lives where her reach can find it without breaking stride. Chalk remembers everyone in a script that is both public and private. To the room, the marks say, this is a house that trusts and keeps track. To her, they say, this widow paid with thread and kindness last week. And kindness has a way of compounding. This labourer is good for next market's coin, but not for tonight's third cup. This constable has done his rounds fair and deserves a bowl carried with dignity rather than fuss. The Book of Nights is written in her head as much as on the board. When trouble rises, she edits not with scolding but with context. You've a hard morning, spoken as if it were the night's own weather forecast. Temper obeys weather better than law. Around her, women work in precise bands of responsibility. The server with a sleeve rolled past the elbow carries 2 jugs and a perimeter. She keeps her balance by knowing where her eyes belong. On the path, on the rim, on the keeper when a decision needs synchronizing. She belongs to the house without being owned by it. A bench that would try to test this learns the house's policy firm. Not theatrical, the room knows the difference between flirtation and fishing, between courtesy that oils a long evening and the kind of attention that shortens a woman's safety. The keeper's gaze is the dam. Behind it flows the room. In front of it, no one wades without permission. Some nights the brewer herself is here. The alewife whose kettles perfumed the lane earlier. She comes to taste whether the tavern draws her work with respect and to collect a slice of the week's truth. Whose coin has grown thin, which road will be worth the cart tomorrow, what gossip has cured into something useful. She sits near the cask for a while, talking in measurements that carry whether a finger of bitterness. A hand of heat then migrates to the wall that breathes a little coolness. When 2 men begin to compare what the cup owes them versus what they owe it, she offers a remark that turns the contest into recipe, and the room smiles because the evening will be better for advice disguised as anecdote. Girls pass through in daylight hours with errands, carrying a trencher to an aunt who minds 3 children, delivering a jug with a string tied around its neck as if it were a small animal that might wander off. At night they are elsewhere, by policy and common sense. Women who come to drink or eat do so with the room's consent, not its suspicion. A mother sits with her sister and talks low about a boy apprenticed 3 streets away who has learned to be dutiful but not to sleep. A seamstress leans into a bowl and lets steam settle, grief in the soft places of her face. A daughter sits 2 seats off and learns by listening how women transact without receipts. A dozen eggs promise, a loan of a shawl remember, a warning about a midwife whose fees have gone from fair to hopeful. None of this is spectacle. The tavern permits it to happen because it is the town's way to keep women from having to stand in doorways to do their business. Boundaries exist, and they are maintained without ceremony when possible and with it when not. A man whose jokes are a size too large for the hour receives an errand delivered as courtesy. Be so kind as to fetch the wedge. The draught argues and finds himself outside looking at the night. Cooled by its manners, if he returns chastened, the house forgets with him. If not, the constable summoned by no more than a glance toward the lane appears as if he had planned to warm his hands anyway. The keeper does not humiliate, she resizes it. It is a craft. It keeps the room from needing larger remedies. Behind the bar there is often another woman, older or younger, who does not draw much attention to herself but holds the house's continuity the way a spine holds a body. She knows which regulars are recovering from a week that did not pay fairly, and will slide them small mercies, an extra heel of bread, a cup of small beer that arrives before pride knows it as ask. She also knows who has a history with quarrel, and will set their cups on opposite sides of a draught that keeps tempers from thinking they are the only heat in the room. If coin runs short at her end of the board, she becomes philosopher enough to take payment in promises phrased as tasks. Help stack wood on Sunday. We'll call it square. Her genius is to speak in the voice of inevitability, so that help becomes a plan rather than a favour that could sour. A scene unfolds that the house has rehearsed enough times to let it look unplanned. Two men who share a fence have shared grievances all summer. Tonight, after cups that should have ended a half hour ago, the word always makes its dangerous appearance. You always leave the gate, one says. You always borrow the ladder. The ledger of petty foreverness opens its long mouth. The server sets a candle on their table, light asks for honesty and deposes grievance. The keeper, crossing with a bowl, pauses just long enough to change the grammar. Tell it to tomorrow, she says, and the room laughs with relief because tomorrow is the magistrate who can sit with maps and measure. Tell it to tomorrow becomes the phrase that saves two garden. The men eat a spoonful each, embarrassed back into neighbourliness. Later, she will arrange a meeting on the threshold at late afternoon when work is tired and pride is short of breath. She will stand between them with a cup in each hand and enough light to shame exaggeration. The fence will be mended in a week, and nobody will remember this as a tavern story because the good stories here end in nothing. There are women whose living brushes the shadowed edges of this house's economy companionship sold in hours rather than pints. Arrangements that are regulated in one parish, tolerated in the next, and argued over from pulpit to bench. This tavern keeps a cordial distance and a firm policy. Upstairs rooms, if any, are rented by the keeper like any bed, by night, with condition, under the plain rule that the house's safety and dignity cannot be higher. A woman who works that trade passes through the room as through weather acknowledged without being cornered, protected without being patronised. Language stays clear, hands stay to themselves. If a man forgets, the house remembers for him with the reminder that does not need volume to hold iron. The line between tavern and brothel is not porous here. It is patrolled by custom and the keeper's reputation. The larger commerce of sex, with its contradictions and civic hypocrisy, belongs to another telling. Here it is enough to say that women must contrive safety, and good houses help them. Midwives find the tavern useful as a post office for news that wants to travel compassionately. A soft word passed at the bar warns that a birth is coming early. Another assures that a fever broke. A third arranges a kettle and clean cloths to be left by a particular door when the bell in the lane says it is past decent visiting hours. The room becomes logistics for mercy. A cup is paid in coins, but the information it buys is worth more than drink. In return, the midwife advises the boy who runs errands to wash his hands after the tannery, and before he passes bread. She speaks of it as superstition if the room needs it framed gently, and the house nods because lived wisdom does not require doctrine. Widows do arithmetic no man envy. The tavern's light lets them borrow an hour of calm to lay out a week on a scrap of wax tablet. They count rent and flour. Cloth and the shoemaker's quarter owe. When their eyes lift, they lift to women who can be asked where credit is fair and where it is disguised insult. It is not that men do not know these things. It is that women know the temperature at which to ask. The house keeps them company without intruding. Now and then a server lays a carrot into a bowl that had no right to expect it. The gesture is recorded nowhere and remembered everywhere. Some evenings weave a different pattern. A troupe of song comes through the kind of group that includes women able to sing the harmony that makes men's eyes go soft without their pride noticing. The keeper relents and lets instruments inside within reason. The women of the troupe stand where sound behaves and light does not terrorise. Coins appear as if out of decent air. Children, late beyond sense, nest in shawls and breathe evenly. The songs are not politics and not religion, and yet they teach both by reminding a town how to listen without interrupting. When the last note fades, the keeper claps exactly once, and the room understands why that is the right number. In the narrow space behind the bar, when the rush is between waves, women speak in the shorthand of people who cannot stop moving. A glance says, table 3 will need small beer next or the talk will tip. Another says, the boy is limping, send him to fetch from the nearer cask. A half smile says, the constable has finished being the constable and would like to be a man with a bowl. A raised brow toward the ledger says, forgive the miller's wife this once, the river took more than grain today. Across 100 such exchanges, a policy runs, the room must land everyone safely if it can. Women are the pilots of that landing more often than not. Close to closing, as candles learn humility and dice relearn the value of staying put, a small knot of men begins to rehearse a quarrel it will never perform. Their voices rise, a chair skews, the air tightens. The keeper does not stride, she drifts the way a curtain drifts to close a draught. She places a bowl, not a cup, between them, and says in a tone that chooses a smaller world, eat. They do, because a spoon is a leash on pride, and because in this house being fed is how you're reminded you belong. The quarrel deflates the way a bell grows quiet after its own surprise. No one applauds. That is not the point. The point is that women run the room's thermostat without anyone having to name it as such. Our traveller, who's been a guest rather than a spectator, recognises the pattern now. The night is safest when women are allowed to practice the crafts they carry, keeping ledgers. Brewing steadiness, enforcing grace, distributing small mercies with the accuracy of a mason's plant. The room's warmth is not only the hearth, it is the policy of when practised in public. When the latch lifts for the last time and the draught takes one small souvenir of the evening, it passes the keeper's shoulder as through a gate. She shuts it, counts the candle's last breaths, and writes a mark on the board that only she understands. It stands for a night landed without injury. In many towns, that is the finest luxury the house can sell. Dice teach a room how to breathe. They are small, but they pull air the way a tide pulls bathe. In a hole out again, at the table near the aisle, Hazard has taken its usual seat, which is not quite at the centre of things and not quite at the edge. The men who play know why. Luck prefers witnesses but not crowds. The board is a plank planed smoother than its neighbours, as if hands had learned to rub the knight's rough places into something that would not nick the skin. 2 bone cubes live in a shallow dish when they are resting, their pips inked with a care that says ritual matters. The dish smells faintly of tallow and a little of thyme, which is to say the house believes in cleanliness without expecting perfume. Rules make courage affordable. Hazard, tonight, begins modestly, an ante that would buy a bowl and a heel of bread. The caller speaks low, the way men speak when they want to keep a god from hearing and changing his mind. There is no cry, no singing, only the little ceremony of fingers drying on cloth so the cast is a matter of skill, where skill is allowed to exist. And not the story of a wet palm. A candle sits at shoulder height, not so near that heat will distort the men's sense of themselves. Not so far that shadow can invent numbers. The keeper has placed it there with the same precision she uses for the wedge at the door, a draught that is honest to the lungs, a light that is honest to dice. The throw itself is an argument compressed into an instant. The shooter cups the cubes, not like a priest, not like a thief, but like a man who has learned to measure his own force. There is the soft rattle of bone in wood, then the relief, then the most delicate sound in the room. The little clatter as numbers decide to become fate. Around the table, chests pause, then resign themselves to what pips confess, a 4 and a 3, a small, good sound of breath. Coins begin to move the way birds lift from a hedgerow suddenly and yet predictably. No one loses much, no one wins more than the knight can keep in its pocket without jingling. Cards exist here, but they behave as if they know they are younger in this world than dice. A deck lives wrapped in cloth in a drawer the keeper does not lock but does not forget. When it comes out, men handle it in a way that splits the difference between respect and suspicion. The pasteboard has warped a little from damp. The painted figures kings who look tired of responsibility. Queens who look like they know the price of patience peer from corners rubbed nearly to absence. Games are simple, triumphs that depend on the right face arriving at the right moment, tricks that teach memory to work faster than prior. The shuffling is an hour's meditation. By the 3rd or 4th pass, everyone at the table knows who handles cards like a clerk and who handles them like a man who has stared too long at a mirror. Cheating is a story the table tells itself, so it does not have to admit to randomness. Here, the house has practical rule. No loaded dice if a pair feels like it has opinions. The keeper will place it in the water bowl near the hearth and watch which face seeks the surface like a sinner, seeking absolution. No marking the deck if a corner looks bitter. The cards go away and conversation arrives instead. Sleeving coins is theft. Palming them back into the game is theatre tolerated only if everyone agreed to be an audience. The punishment for small sins is proportionate. A glance as cool as iron, a pause long enough to remind the offender he owns his hands and the room can see them. A suggestion that the player and the candle change places so that light can do what law would do if the sums were larger. Larger sins draw the constable, but larger sins are rare, because the ledger behind the bar keeps reputations as carefully as it keeps coin. Games breed rituals the way kitchens breed steam. Men knock on wood before a throw, not to wake spirits, but to keep their own hands modest. Someone taps a ring twice against the rim of his cup, the small punctuation that means his bet will not be increased by gossip, but only by his own decision. A lucky die is kissed and then placed deliberately in the dish, because luck hates greediness. On nights when weather has tired everyone into near silence, the dice table lends the room its metronome. Rattle, clatter, breathe. On nights when the road has spilled a loud market into the tavern, the table becomes a harbour where attention can moor for a few minutes and then put back out calmer. Women play too. Though custom edits the cast, the alewife will take a seat and win a small round when she needs to teach a lesson about bragging. Her odds are no better than anyone's, but her discipline is, and then she will retire with a remark about chores that allows the loser to keep his mouth. A seamstress who knows numbers better than men expect will sit in, stitch paused and thread looped around her left finger, and demonstrate the sort of luck that is really practice, betting when other faces are busy deciding how they feel. The room does not turn this into a sermon. It files away another piece of literacy under the heading "Do Not Assume." Wagering, in houses like this, is not only about coin, tokens moved, an afternoon's help in the yard, a promise to put a word in at the gill, a plank shaved to fit the table where the dice live, so that the future will not wobble. Sometimes a bet is really a form of accounting. To the throw, a man says, "For the price of fetching salt to my wife in the morning." He wins and fetches anyway, because winning does not unmake duty. It only relieves the gloom around it. Occasionally someone stakes pride too heavy, then the table's elders do what elders do. They set the stakes smaller themselves, as if the rules had always wanted it that way, and the man's face is spared having to say thank you out loud. Risk calibration is the secret syllabus. Young men learn how loudly their hearts beat and how much of that volume it is wise to show. A cautious soul tests his appetite in pennies and discovers he can want without suffering. An impulsive one shakes 3 losses into his palm and discovers there are kinds of silence a room will forgive and kinds it will not. Dice. More than drink. Teach the town who needs a steadying trade and who can be trusted to carry a message that should not be told to a man who hates to wait. The keeper watches this quietly, noting with the same mental chalk she uses for credit who should be allowed another cup and who should be landed with small beer and a sandwich of trencher bread and apology. Religion, which has opinions on everything that meddles with hope, prowls the margin of the table. The priest does not scold unless scolding will buy safety. He knows better than most that the lot has been used to decide matters of property and mercy in sober daylight. Fate, after all, is not only a tavern game. Now and then he will lift a brow if stakes creep towards scandal. More often he will remind a loud winner that humility travels farther on muddy streets. On certain feast eves, when the town is loud with relief at having survived another season, he will even allow himself a small throw, lose politely, and gain 3 men's ears for a caution he wants to carry to market day. Superstition walks with mathematics here. Men count pips without counting their blessings. They keep track of runs. They believe in hands being hot and talk about it only as much as to keep their nerve from thinking it has gone invisible. A smeared pip becomes a parable, a 3 pretending to be a 2, and for a week the phrase will excuse errors in love and in figures. A die that hits a cup and lands cocked counts as a theological question. The house rules say, roll again, and do not argue with furniture. Someone insists the table plays kinder if a sprig of rosemary lies beneath the dish. Another insists the smell of rosemary makes his luck sulk. The keeper allows both truths to live so long as neither one makes noise. Skill exists, and not only in the way a man casts. It lives in patience, knowing when to sit a round out. Not because money is thin, but because the room's temperature says this is a moment to let others find their balance. It lives in watching learning who sighs before a bad throw, who drinks after a good one, who turns his ring when he's about to lie to himself. It lives in knowing when to convert a small win into generosity at the bar, so that luck is thanked and not hoarded. The men who carry this skill are hardly ever called lucky by the room. They are called steady, and steady is what a town likes to keep on short roads. Not every play is blessed. There are nights when a man who hates his life tries to beat it at dice and loses to the arithmetic of the world. The table makes room for that grief by shrinking the audience. Candles travel away. The row of cups becomes a little wall. The keeper stays near without hovering. If the man is dangerous to himself, someone suggests fresh air and walks him to the door under the old pretense of needing a witness for weather. If he's only tired, a bowl arrives in front of him with a spoon placed in the way that means, eat first. Dice will forgive him when he return, or he will forgive dice by deciding not to. Now and then the room remembers games that are play without coin. Quoits in the yard in the months when light lingers. Skittles on a board that has seen too much ale to count reliably. Riddles traded across a bench as if words were stones in a pocket. A travelling juggler leaves behind 3 rag balls and a rumour about balance. And for a week boys practice with apples until the kitchen complains. The house favours these. They equalise men who cannot afford to wager, and men who should not. Laughter becomes the stake, and the night loosens its spine. Near closing, the dice retire with a dignity the room agrees upon. No last wild throw, no desperate doubling. The dish returns to its shelf, the candle is pinched, the plank is wiped with a cloth that smells of vinegar and effort. Coins settle into pockets that are not much heavier than they were, which is for the best. Fortune has been asked to dance and has chosen to walk instead. No one feels insulted. The keeper adds a mark to the ledger that is not about money but about temperature. Games were fair. Faces were saved. Risk taught what it was supposed to teach. Our traveller, who wagered a promise to carry a message to a cooper tomorrow and won the right to do it cheerfully. Finishes a last swallow of small beer and understands why the table sits where it does. Close enough to the world to matter. Far enough not to run it, the room exhales. Dice sleep. The night keeps its lessons, and the tavern, which prefers skill and mercy to luck alone, banks the fire as if it, too, were a game that can be won by doing ordinary things in the right order. Spectacle visits the tavern the way weather does sometimes expected, sometimes inconvenient, always reminding the town that appetite is larger than supper and talk. It does not live here, not exactly, but it borrows the room as a lob. Word arrives first. A boy with straw in his hair runs ahead of a man leading a sack that wriggles. A fiddler comes 2 nights early to warm the town's curiosity. A carpenter's son claims he saw a ring staked out behind the farriers, with a rope that looks more serious than usual. The tavern receives these rumours with the caution of a house that has seen many fairs. It makes space for excitement without letting it decide the night. Some entertainments are harmless in the way thunder is harmless at distance. A juggler sets up near the door, chooses apples because they're cheap to bruise, and throws a bright arc that makes children forget to blink. A bone player finds the rhythm in 2 spoons and turns a bench into a drum. Men who claim they do not dance discover their feet have a small grammar after all. Riddles travel from mouth to mouth like cups, and the prize is laughter that does not sting. Even a puppet booth can bloom in the lane at dusk, cloth stretched over a frame. 2 voices pretending to be 5, and the room will let its hum leak outside for an hour. Because simple spectacle wears well on a town that spends most days respecting gravity. Other entertainments are heavier and older in the bone. Animals set against animal. Strength set against nerve. The house treats these as history as much as event. It does not advertise. It lets talk do the advertising if it must, and even then the words come wrapped in context. There may be birds tomorrow, someone says, and means cocks under baskets and wagers passed in the careful darkness of men's palms. The bear is chained, someone else murmurs, and the other sentence contains a century of discomfort. The tavern will pour for those who mean to go look, because thirst is still thirst, but it will not lend its benches to make a show of cruelty. If a ring's raised in the yard beyond, the keeper closes the back door and asks the boy to fetch wood by the front. Policy, not sermon. When animals are brought through town, the mood shifts in a way the room narrowly tolerates. You hear it first, dogs challenging in voices that remember ancestors. The bear's chain arguing with itself like a man having second thoughts. The handler's fatigued commands. Men step outside and return changed by the sight, either grim or excited. The tavern places buffer objects in the path of such feeling. A plate of bread and cheese set down before words can grow sharp. A fresh candle that insists on faces being seen clearly. A request made in a tone that moves a table 2 feet so that any quarrel must walk farther to find company. Nothing here is theatrical, everything is intentional. Wagering gathers around these spectacles like smoke. It smells of pride and the desire to make fate pronounce on a choice. The house, which has already lent its light to fair dice and careful cards, keeps its scale small on such days. If men ask to mark stakes on the chalkboard, the keeper offers the back of a scrap and a pencil stub instead. For your pockets, she said, and means. Let losses travel home smaller. She waters stronger cups into softer cups before they are asked for, and most men take the hint because the spectacle can already make the blood feel too warm. There is a sound to crowd heat that rooms learn to recognize early and avoid. It is not volume, it is compression, the way voices stack until a single shout can collapse them into something worse. The tavern maintains its bar like a shoreline against that tide. The measure is shown open, the pace is steady. The boy moves in a route that obliges elbows to uncurl. A constable leans at the door as if to warm his hand, and in that leaning he does more work than he could by walking in. The keeper's eyes sit where they can cancel. Inches. Between 2 men who have decided today's bout tells them a truth about themselves it has no authority to tell. Between a stranger's eager grin and the locals' quiet disapproval. The house is not an arena. It remembers this out loud when necessary. Not all strength shows are grim. Wrestling can be play with rules everyone respects. On summer evenings, a circle clears in the yard, shirts come off, and 2 men try to find out which of them understands balance better. Wages are small. Pride is cordial, and there is a bowl waiting for both. The tavern watches these with approval and keeps the ale honest. It prefers contests that leave hands eager for hammers in the morning. A girl once put down her basket, stepped into a ring with a grin, and laid a boy flat using a trick she learned hoisting cask. The cheer that followed was a good kind of spectacle. Surprise transformed into admiration, with no blood owing anyone anything. Minstrels carry their own theatre. They sing of battles as if the grass had asked for it. and the room forgives them because song is the country's way of remembering names when parchment is expensive. The keeper, hoping to steer the night toward mercy, requests ballads where cunning wins more than cruelty. The fox that outwits the hunt, she suggests, and a verse appears. The knight who learns humility, and story finds the right chord. In these retellings, the room drinks to cleverness, to patience, to neighbours catching neighbours before they fall as if to remind itself that the spectacles it prefers are those in which skill prevents harm. Children magnify, which is why the house parcels spectacle carefully around them. The juggler is allowed, the bear is not. A fifer with quick fingers is welcomed. The cock baskets are shifted to a corner of the market the room cannot see. Mothers and aunts conspire with the keeper silently to edit the street. When the unavoidable arrives too close, a jeer too sharp, a poster too red, the server becomes a screen, and a bowl becomes a distraction with gravity. The cat is enrolled to be discovered under a bent, a living thing softer than the images outside. This is management, not innocence. The room knows the world will teach lessons in its own time. But a house that stands between a child and a spectacle hungry for the wrong sort of attention counts that as part of its ledger of decency. The church frowns, sometimes publicly, sometimes with a sigh handed only to the priest's cup. Fasts and fairs make awkward neighbours, and sermons on cruelty travel through the week like whether you can smell but not see. The tavern does not debate from the bar, it demonstrates instead, closing a door, diluting a cup, suggesting an errand that changes a man's position by enough degrees that his appetite cools. When asked, the keeper will say mildly, "We sell warmth, not heat," and most men understand the difference. Those who do not often have other houses to drink in, this one prefers to open its shutters on quiet mornings. Law touches spectacle at odd angle. Towns post bans on baiting and then forget them until someone's injury forces a memory. Fines are collected that fund things nobody wants to argue against roads. Bridges, alms, and thus the circle becomes untidy. The constable confesses over a bowl that he hates being sent to collect what the aldermen do not hate taking. The priest says a word about hearts being taught by practice more than penance. The mason mutters about rings being set on green, not on proper flag. The room lets the conversation run like water until it clears itself. Spectacle survives rules by moving a field over a day later. The tavern survives spectacle by remembering what kind of house it is every night. And there is always the aftermath, the way a town looks at itself after shouting. On such evenings, the door opens to faces that have a shine not entirely from rain. The tavern receives them as it receives men after funeral, with small beer, with bread, with a light that does not interrogate. If a quarrel has followed men inside, it is given a seat between bowls and told to eat first. If shame has come in with them, it is handed a job help stack stools, wipe the board, and thus given a way to turn into usefulness before it can become poison. By midnight, the room has usually managed to land everyone on the calmer bank of themselves. Our traveller goes once, out of curiosity, to see the ring. The rope is new, the handlers are tired, the air is thick with the sort of cheering that ends sleepily, rather than cleanly. He returns to the tavern, wanting to wash his hands without knowing why. The keeper reads that expression the way sailors read a sky, and slides him a cup that tastes of hedge, not ire. "Here we do talking," she says, a sentence so simple it might be a broom. He drinks and finds that word, a spectacle, are enough for a man who must sleep and work and meet his neighbour's eyes in daylight. The night closes as the better shows do. Without thunder, but thunder with craft. A juggler's apples become tomorrow's sauce. The bone player trades a tune for a bowl and promises to return after the fair. The poster in the lane loses its colour to rain. The tavern banks its fire, counts its cups, and writes in its quiet column that no one will see kept the world from turning sharper than it had to. In some towns, that is the finest form of entertainment available. The trick of sending men home a little kinder than they arrived. Their voices cool, their hands remembering work. The house claims no credit in public. It keeps the trick ready for tomorrow. Trouble in a room like this rarely arrives in armour. It comes in soft shoes, disguised as grammar. A sentence starts with always or never, and suddenly a voice has made the past into a weapon. A joke leans a degree too far into a man's bruised pride. A debt walks through the door in the shape of a coin that did not appear when it should have, and the shame it brings wants to change its name to anger. Fatigue, which is honest but not wise, lends weight to words that meant to be light. The tavern has seen all of these and keeps a quiet catechism of prevention. The first defence is pace. The keeper manages it the way a helmsman manages a tide without drama, with constant attention. When talk hurries, she slows the room with bowls and errands. When silence grows tense, she lets a candle travel. Because light makes bluster, reconsider how it looks on a face. Her boy has a root that bends arrogance into courtesy. He passes between men just as shoulders begin to rise, obliging elbows to lift and tempers to drop by a notch. A wedge at the door adjusts draft and therefore volume. Policy here is an instrument played in small notes, slights, the small coins of insult. Do most of the purchasing for violence. They are cheap to mint and quick to spend. A man who has been laughed at by a day's bad luck hears challenge where none was offered. A man who owes hears accusation in the ordinary clink of coin. The house reads these currents as a miller reads a stream. It places men where their injuries cannot amplify one another. The bench that invites boasting is kept 2 arm lengths from the bench that invites grievance. The dice table, which can turn pride into arithmetic, is shifted half a yard when a voice starts to sharpen. None of this is theatrical. It is carpentry applied to feeling. Honour is not a single thing. For one man it is a fair weight on a measure. For another it is how loudly the room remembers his father. Both versions can start a fight if they feel pinched. The keeper protects honour by giving it honest work. A man who arrives hot over a word at the forge is sent to fetch a cask from the cooler corner, an errand with the dignity of strength. He returns with his breath reordered and his hands full of usefulness instead of proof. Another is offered the job of tasting a pot that needs a decision about salt. His face learns in an instant that being trusted is better than being feared. You could call this manipulation. The house calls it governance by task. Debt is the saboteur that knows how to pick any lock. Few things make a man so quick to take offence as the knowledge that his purse is not the equal of his appetite. The ledger behind the bar is organised to keep this fanged shame from finding a throat. Credits are recorded plainly, mercies less so. A mark on the board that looks like a tally of cups might also be a record of a cartwheel mended without a bill. The keeper speaks the language of later carefully, because later can be both insult and rescue. Later here means, we know your work, we know you will return. Said in the right tone, it lowers his voices faster than any threat. Quarrels begin physically in small rehearsals. A man plants his feet wider as if the floor had become river. Another squares his shoulders under the beam that has taught taller men humility. Palms open and close without cups in them. The house interrupts these rehearsals with props. A bowl appears where fists were about to find reason. A knife is asked for, may I? And then moved away, not as confiscation but as kitchen logic. A stool is rotated to force a stance to change. When the rehearsals are spoiled, the play is often cancelled. When fights do spark, they behave like kitchen fire. Most die quickly if smothered with the right cloth. A shove. A chair's ankle protests, a cup goes down. The room makes itself heavy. Men who were all air and heat a moment before find themselves bearing the weight of benches, of the keeper's flatlet, of attention. Attention is a dousing agent here. To be watched can be worse than to be struck, because watchers will remember, and memory is an expensive witness. The constable, if called, appears as if he had only stopped to warm his hands. He asks for names the way a baker asks for flour, as if nothing else can proceed until they are given. Weapons in this telling are ordinary. Words sharpened, cups misused, a belt's buckle reconsidered. Steel exists in the world, of course, but this room does not let it become part of its climate, if it can help it. Men who carry knives as tools are asked to let the door hold them a while not as law, as courtesy. Staff stand in a corner where they are walking sticks rather than leverage. The room has learned that a place which confers usefulness on objects will not easily be persuaded to let them become weapons. A chair that remembers carrying a sleeping child is less likely to be thrown than one that stands idle in braggart posture. If the blow lands a slap made from a day's grievances, a fist that forgot to ask permission, the house shifts to containment, not spectacle, containment. Candles travel away to keep crowds from gathering eyes. The boy goes to the threshold to invite air and, if need be, witnesses. The keeper speaks in the register that names people as kin to their better selves. Thomas, not you. Not stop. A damp cloth arrive, not because blood has demanded drama, but because coolness is policy. The man who has lost face is given a task that returns it. Carry a stool back to true. Fetch water. Stand with the constable and count the breaths until voice returns to sense. Healing. When needed. This is the room's shared competent. No one here pretends to be a physician, and no one here neglects what clean water and pressure can teach a cut about humility. Vinegar is useful. So is a strip torn from a shirt whose owner will be told a fine story later about heroism to ease the loss. Herbs the practical, non-miraculous kind appear from the kitchen for noses that forgot they were bone, for knuckles that think they are arguments. Women oversee this with the patience of those who have finished too many days to be impressed by a fresh piece of foolishness. They keep instruction quiet. Hold that there, breathe with me. Drink this, it will slow your temper's feet. Law's shadow falls differently than Law's hand. Church courts care about scandal, borough courts care about broken things that require coin to mend. Guilds care about the reputation of their benches. The tavern cares about tomorrow, about whether men can return to the same door without flinching. So the house arbitrates where it can. Apologies are negotiated in the grammar of bowls and cloths. Restitution is arranged in hours and shoulders. You will carry wood for the widow on market morning. You will repair the rung you tried to climb in anger. Formal justice can still be sought. Nothing here forbids it. But the room prefers repairs within the craft of neighbourliness. It reduces the number of people who must remember ugliness in detail. A few tempers travel without their own weather system and cannot be landed easily. The house know these like sailors, no reef. Such men are sat where smoke claims faces early, not to punish, but to remove audience. Their first cup is mildness. Their second is the permission to go home. If they do not read those messages, the constable reads for them. The keeper will take a loss on a night's custom to preserve the week's peace. It is an investment with a proven return. There are also nights when war outside walks inside on men's boots, levy rumours, unpaid wages, an officer's name that has accumulated more stories than respect. These make tinder of pride. The tavern becomes Switzerland by craft. It puts both sides of a grudge under the same light and asks them to describe the same map. Where will your cart pass tomorrow? The keeper asks the loudest voice, and the room listens as the question turns an argument back into logistics. A man who can say the south gate at dawn is less likely to swing at someone whose answer is the east gate at 7, because the geography of labour is more persuasive than any sermon. Alcohol does not create violence so much as it accelerates what is already running. The house therefore keeps the speed limit with tact. Small beer arrives disguised as generosity. Strong cups are slowed with bread. A man who drinks faster than he thinks finds his coins counted back to him one at a time with the sort of courtesy that makes refusing churlish. Women are seated where their exits are clear and their safety is assumed rather than argued. Strangers are given neighbours like bumpers in a child's game of bowl. None of this looks like policing. It looks like hospitality, which is the older word for public order. Sometimes, blessedly, a fight migrates into comedy before it learns to be dangerous. Two men square without deciding whether they are angry. A chair leg complains. The cat, choosing side, walks across a lap and breaks the spell. Laughter opens the window that pride had tried to nail shut. The keeper, who understands timing better than any jester, drops a line that lets both say face, shake the dust, not the bones, she says, and the room decides to applaud common sense rather than bravery. The competents find themselves lifting bowls instead of fists, and the story that will be told tomorrow at the pump is about the cat, not about shame. When harm does happen, and it will, because rooms are not miracles, the aftermath is treated like rain. Endure, then wiped up. The floor is raked so it remembers nothing that would provoke tomorrow. The ledger receives a mark that means, watch this man kindly for a week. The constable is given a bowl so that law feels fed as well as armed. A prayer might be said quietly by someone who believes in such lubrication for the gears of fate. The rest of the room returns to the pace that prevents heat from congealing into narrative. Our traveller sits through one such squall and learns more about the town than a quiet night could teach. He sees how fast always can threaten to become a blow, how efficiently a spoon can disarm a storer, how much of peace is made from moving objects by inches rather than from speeches by the yard. He notes, with gratitude, that no one asked him to be braver than necessary. The house handled the bravery. When the draft finally remembers to be a breeze again and the smoke line rises, the night looks ordinary, which is another word for rescued. By closing, the room has landed its cargo with no one overboard. Dice asleep. Bowls stack, the bar breathes. The keeper marks the board with a sign only she and maybe the constable understand. Deferred thunder. It means the weather of pride passed without striking, and that tomorrow the town can spend its temper on work instead of mending faces. Outside, the lane shines with rain. Inside, the benches shine with use. Peace is not a gift here. It is a craft, and tonight it was practiced well. Closing is not an hour so much as a braid of tasks. The bell in the lane gives its thin decree, but the room obeys the keeper, not the iron. She reduces the night by degrees the way a careful cook reduces a sauce. Steadier flame, less stir. Candles are trimmed and then one by one persuaded to stop thinking of themselves as sons. The dice retire to their shelf. The cards are wrapped in cloth and slid home with the softness reserved for tools that can cut. Cups gather into families, bowls stack in quiet towers. The ledger receives a last line written in a hand that has learned to be calm even when the figures try to climb. Shutters turn, and that world shrinks to what the room can keep warm without boasting. A wedge kisses the door. A draft, who has been a citizen all evening, is told to make itself small. The hearth becomes a red map of coal. Here a peninsula. There a narrow channel. The poker draws borders the way a surveyor draws them. So tomorrow we'll inherit something tidy rather than a field of regrets. The iron crane, relieved of its pot, swings back to centre like a sentry at ease. Embers are buried as if they were rumours best forgotten before they teach themselves to shout. Those who will sleep here begin to molt the desk. Boots are unthreaded, their laces set in loops like tame snakes. Cloaks become walls around bodies that want less audience. Hats learn humility on pegs. The floor, honest as ever, accepts new arrangement. Pallets pulled near the hearth's ghost warmth. A bench claimed by a back that negotiates with wood more trustingly than with straw. A corner marked by a rolled cloak and the logic of proximity to the door for a man who prefers to wake before weather does. The keeper has a handful of ropes and latailles for those who can afford a bed above the hall. A frame that will hold straw as a plain mattress if the knots remember to be true. Sleep tight here is both blessing and instruction. The shared chamber upstairs, chamber being a generous word for a room that fits beds, the way a cupboard fits plates, smells of bodies and soap. Of outdoor air, grudgingly traded for indoor safety. Sheets, where they exist, are arguments with scarcity. Washed when the weather permits and the house can spare a day of labour for the line. More often there is linen against skin for the lucky and plain wool for the stubbornly practical. Turn-down service is a hand smoothing lumps into a democracy and a whispered reminder not to set a rushlight inside a curtain of dreams. Fire is theft at night. The house cannot afford generosity to do it. Vermin are not scandal. They are population. Fleas attend as citizen, and there is a craft to discouraging them that belongs to the household gods. Rosemary tucked into seams, pennyroyal at bed edges, a sheet hung over straw and beaten by a young arm with more enthusiasm than resentment. Lice are a different parliament, solved by combs and mothering and, when pride can afford it, a visit to the bathhouse on a market day when the water is less philosophical. The tavern neither lies about these companions nor indulges them. Cleanliness is a system here, not a miracle. Ash and boiling water, sun when possible, patience always. Night noises arrive and take their places like a choir that knows its parts. From the lane, watchmen calling the hour to reassure the timid and themselves. A cart complaining to its own axle. The river arguing with a grate. From the roofs, rain writing its soft legal documents. From the yard, a last scuffle among cats negotiating trash and empire. Indoors, benches mutter as sleepers change treaties with their backs. A man's breath develops a saw's rhythm and then remembers the softer craft of plane and rasp. A child whimpers in the way children practice storms. The mother's hand, experienced at tides, finds the right pressure to convince small hearts that weather is a story and not a verdict. Before sleep, there is maintenance. The chamber pots are set where they will be found without drama. A shutter's bar is turned so shit to the window can be asked to behave. A bucket is left near the hearth in case a cinder decides to remember daylight. The keeper walks the perimeter with the gait of a captain checking rigging. Peg. Ba. Lat. Hin. Nothing heroic. Everything necessary. In her pocket, a keyring rehearses its opinion softly. Locks are not the difference between safety and danger. They are the difference between invitation and inconvenience. In towns like this, inconvenience is often enough. Curfew is a civic fiction observed in proportion to weather and appetite. The constable's steps report from the lane like punctuation marks. He pauses at the tavern door, palm on wood, to feel whether the room behind it hums in a key that needs his voice. It does not. He moves on, thankful for houses that police themselves with soup and arithmetic. Farther off, a church bell persuades the hour to confess. A dog argues theology with it and is persuaded to hush by a thrown clod and the complicated affection of a sleepy neighbour. For those who sleep in the hall, privacy is a courtesy, not a war. People turn their faces toward the beam or the plaster and make voices small. A soldier gathers his cloak the way men without rooms gather dignity, and arranges his pack as both pillow and border. A merchant, stubborn in habit, counts quietly to a number that meant profit in a better week and then lets the numbers line up into sheets. A pilgrim places a palm on the scallop shell sewn to his cap and thanks whatever listens for dry straw. Two men back to back learn that trust is sometimes geometry. A widow asleep in a pallet near the hearth remembers to move her feet away from ember, land the way sailors remember low bridges without looking up. The upstairs room, crowded without being cruel, collects its own weather. Snores harmonise into something like a cheap organ. Someone dreams in a language the town does not speak and wakes with the powerful humility of a man reminded that not all meanings belong to him. Hush follows like a friend who does not need to be thanked. If a cough begins a winter witness, another bed answers with a cup from the shelf in a hand. In this light, medicine is water warmed over an ember and made honest with a shred of time. No one lectures. The cure is not only in the cup but in the fact of being handed it. Below, the fire's last breath tucks itself under ash and becomes patient. Ash is memory in powder form. In the morning it will accept more logs and teach flame to be civilized. The iron by the hearth cools enough to shrink back into itself with tiny clicks, the language of metal voting to rest. A mouse is discouraged from turning the board into pilgrimage by a cat arranged like a question mark where crumbs conspire. The kitchen ladle, cleaned and hung in the heat's lee, gleams faintly as if it too dreams of being useful again at dawn. At intervals, the door lifts on its hinge to admit needs that do not understand clocks. A knock. A midwife's boy asking for boiled water and a clean cloth for a berth that chose rain as its witness. The keeper, up instantly because keeper's asleep and, answers with the speed of policy and the warmth of kinship. The pot goes on. A bundle emerges from a chest reserved for this category of emergency. Herbs wrapped in a strip of linen that has been washed to saintliness. Another knock. The constable, low-voiced, wondering if anyone saw men pass with purpose toward the farrier's yard. He is given information measured in commas, not exclamation point. The room remained asleep. The night remains a problem solvable by feet and decency. Latrine and gutter have their say. 2. In streets with sense, the cesspits are down slope from wells by a margin learned through harder centuries. In streets without, you can smell the lesson trying to teach itself. The tavern keeps its midden disciplined and its ash pit farther from gossip than from convenient. A trough near the back step catches the sky for washing hands. A scoop lives there that everyone understands how to use. Clean is relative, and relative is the difference between tomorrow's health and a week wasted in bed regretting a cup of water that looked honest. The thief, if he exists in this night, prefers other houses. A room that arranges sleep as deliberately as it arranged talk is hard to steal from without joining. He tries the shutter, finds a bar. He tries the yard, finds a cat and a bucket placed where ankles remember it at exactly the right moment. He decides not nobler, not permanently, but usefully to try elsewhere. The ledger behind the bar does more for crime prevention than the lock on the door. A town that is seen 4 evenings a week is a town that is difficult to rob. Names, faces. Oh, these are alarms more reliable than bell. Dreams are work the body does without hands. The mason dreams of plumb lines that soften into rivers. The brewer dreams of yeast behaving like good gossip widespread. Gentle, effective. The keeper dreams of a board that balances itself and wakes smiling because impossibility is kinder in sleep. A child dreams of bread taller than a man and wakes to the cat's ear against his cheek. A pilgrim dreams of a road that ends where the sky begins. Which is to say he dreams of starting again. Toward deepest night, something like a prayer passes wordless. Contagious. It's not devotion in the way the chapter house would recognize, though the chapter house would not be insulted by it. It is gratitude disguised as muscle slackening. For a roof that held, for a quarrel that did not mature into shame, for warmth loaned at interest rates the poor can afford. If anyone speaks aloud, it is in the small sentences that belong to beds. There, hush, tomorrow. The house answers in clicks and sighs, a language older than coin and just as persuasive. When dawn finally smudges the shutter's seam with a gentler grey, the tavern comes awake the way a field does, first one blade, then a rustle, then the sound of work wanting to exist. The keeper is already moving, pulling last night's mark into today's plan. The boy is outside kicking the pump's handle to remind it of duty. The cat looks at everyone as if they were late. Straw is shaken, pallets become memory. The floor is raked until it forgets. The first pot for porridge asks for attention. The second pot for brewing asks for promise. Doors think about becoming thresholds again. But for a moment longer, while the air is new and the ledger is blank, the tavern holds the thin, excellent quiet that comes after a night without accident. Our traveller, awake with the roux, sits up and watches the first curl of steam draw a line from pot to beam. He thinks not in words anyone will hear how many hands and decisions it takes to keep ordinary life from falling apart. Then he stands, because standing is the polite way to thank a house that landed you. Morning remembers what night forgets, that a house is a machine as much as a moo. The day slides into its joints with oil made of habit. Ash is sifted so yesterday's patience can become today's flame. The poker organizes embers into a thesis, kindling argues, then agree. The first pot thin porridge, honest as arithmetic takes the front perch. The second a kettle with ambitions claims the rear for washing. Scalding. Persuading wood to admit defeat. Steam writes neat marginalia on the beam and then disappears as if to say, proceed. Outside, the lane edits itself from mystery into logistics. Barrows begin their sentences. Hooves put punctuation on the cobble. Market day is a grammar all its own. By 6th hour, the square will have opinions, fish telling time by their eye. Green stacked in dialects of season. loaves arranged at weights the assize will approve if the world is in a forgiving mood. The tavern becomes a hinge between stall and street. Teamsters duck in for small beer and a heel. Stallholders send a child with a lidded pot and a coin that smells of wool. A boy returns with spoons and news. The door breathes faster. The ledger warm, measures come down from the shelf like law wearing pewter. The stamped quart, the pint, the sly little gill each is polished where a thumb expects it. On the wall, the town's wooden ell hangs for cloth sellers who must prove they know the difference between fairness and optimism. The keeper treats these objects as a liturgy. Show the measure, fill the measure, level the measure where eyes can see. When the alewife's casks arrive, damp hoop. Good cooperage, the bung is prized with a twist that says experience. The first draw is sacrifice to clarity. The second is tasted with a face that does not lie. Sown, she says, which is a blessing and an inventory word. Officials appear like weather with hats, the Elconner. Today in boots too new for comfort, dips a bit of bread in a saucer of fresh draw and tests it with the solemnity of a bishop. He waits for stickiness too much sugar, for bite unfriendly herbs, for honesty, the virtue that keeps streets walkable. The keeper submits the cup with courtesy that does not bow. Assize-men pass, weighing loaves next door. A beadled staff taps rhythm at the threshold to remind everyone the bell has opinions about hours. Licenses are read with lips pursed, fines remembered in the keeper's private arithmetic. And the day proceeds because civility is cheaper than quarrel. Guild mornings are quieter than guild night. Two carpenters confer over a cup about the abbey's beam oak or chestnut, how to shave the belly without losing the truth. A smith's apprentice brings a note on a splinter of lath schedule. Price, a plea for patience disguised as specification, and receives a bowl to carry back so his master's temper will cool before the noon heat sets it. The table acts as drafting board. Pulpit, witness stand, all without boasting. When disagreement threatens to stiffen, the keeper shifts a candle. Faces become legible and the problem shrinks to fit the light. Messages travel on a chain of bowls. A midwife leaves word about a birth gone well. A widow posts a request for 2 shoulders on the Saturday to help move a chest. A carter advertises space to the next market town by scratching a symbol the room recognises on a slate. Pilgrims with parchment letters sealed or merely best intentions folded ask if anyone here is bound east after Mass. Someone always is. The tavern is not a post, but it is the reason posts work. Trust pools here in small, reusable amount. Season writes menus and tempers. In lambing weeks, the room runs on broth with a whisper of mint. In harvest, it runs on appetite and salt. Gallons of both. In Lent, fish and patience. Hops climb poles in the fields, and the bitterness in the cup grows a little tidier by midsummer. In winter, gruit returns like a storyteller. Herb warm and a touch unruly, the keeper rotates casks between corner and corner as if moving livestock to better pasture. A chalk mark on the stave is Gela calendar in shorthand, an ear to the wood is weather forecast. The bathhouse smoke rises 2 lanes over on Saint's Day, and the tavern's morning traffic shifts accordingly. Men smelling of lie and ambition for cleanliness. Buy cider to keep their virtue from squeaking. Women with towels under cloaks stop for broth so they do not faint under the rhetoric of steam. The keeper keeps a basket of penny soap for those who ask without asking, and she does not count it as charity, only as civic accounting that returns with interest when fevers make their rounds and spare this street first. Children compose the noon hour's treble. They carry jugs like errands with handles, rehearsing gravity at human scale. A girl returns the measure with a ribbon tied around the handle. Her mother's thanks for last week's extra carrot. A boy lingers to watch the cat and learns without anyone saying it that patient observation is a town's second police force. The server catches his sleeve before he brushes a candle and turns the catch into a coin trick he leaves grinning and, more importantly, unburn. Debt management is daylight work. The ledger opens to the page where numbers and reputations braid. A mark becomes a visit becomes a plan. Woodstack, a bucket carried to an elder who will not ask. The keeper speaks later only as promise, not as threat. When a man comes with coin and embarrassment, she looks at the line above his name and says, "Good, we'll put you right and call it square." The room witnesses, which means he will not have to narrate his shame again elsewhere. The magistrate's man eats standing, left hand on the hilt out of habit, not menace. He requests receipts and receives them. He remarks on closures and is told politely that hours are observed here in the spirit, if not to the breath. He looks at the measures and nods because nodding is cheaper than paperwork when a house is clean. He leaves 2 words behind, well regulated, that will travel farther than he does. By late morning, the fire finds its second wind. The pot develops depth. Bread, cut, grows architectural edges that suit cheese. A travelling scribe sets up with a portable inkhorn and writes 3 letters for people who would rather entrust love and business to a hand than to chance. The tavern takes a fee in kind, a page copied for the keeper's daughter learning her letters. A tinsmith adjusts a hinge with the bar's edge as an anvil. Pays in a polish that turns pewter into weather for a day. Then the bell in the chapter house tests new, and the room shifts key. Market swells, the door's hinge sings, stew bowls accelerate. Men who swore to take 2 cups take 3 and remain honest, because the house keeps pace as a metronome, not a drum. A priest blesses without spectacle a bowl he pretends he is not blessing. The keeper pretends not to see. God, if he is walking the lane, pretends to prefer this diplomacy to doctrine. In the square, bargaining grows conversational. In here, conversation continues to buy tomorrow. Afternoon. Schlag is policy, say. The casks are topped. The threshold is swept in a line that tells new dust the house has standards. The rushes are turned with a rake so their clean faces are on duty for the evening. A loose peg meets an auger and is reminded of fit. A split trencher's board is bound with a hoop until the cooper has an hour. The boy practices the silent art of replacing a bad candle with a good one, in a way that flatters the room into thinking it replaced itself. The keeper makes a round that is not a round. A word to the brewer about tomorrow's draw. A word to the baker about weights and temper. A glance into the cellar to read dampness and barrels how near to tilt. How much the angel's share has drunk from profit. She writes 2 notes in her private column. Remember Joan's confinement broth. If rain by vespers, wedge on in a draught. Running a house is logistics salted to mercy. By late afternoon the market thins and the square sheds its temporary theatre. The tavern inhales, resets, and tunes for night. The bench under the low beam is rubbed with a cloth that smells faintly of vinegar sanity in liquid form. The dice dish is placed where light will be honest. The bar's cloth is folded into a rectangle that signals to the staff where cups will next be staged. This is mise en place as public order, an army of small placements that prevent the need for large speeches. Our traveller, a helper now rather than only a guest, shoulders a cask end to the cooler corner and learns the weight of grateful work. He fetches water, pauses at the door to let the street's dust finish its sentence outside, and returns to a room that is exactly what it was last night and not at all the same. Day has paid its taxes, evening holds out its hand for wages in kind. Talk, careful risks, bread shared without ledger entry. The house stands ready, measures true, flame civilize, and the first shadows placing their chair. Night will make its case again soon. For the moment there is daylight practical, forgiving, unconcerned with glory. The tavern spends it like sensible coin, and the town earns interest. Money in a house like this is not only coin, it is temperature, timing, and trust arranged into arithmetic. The ledger behind the bar looks simple, because it must be read at a glance. Inside the keeper's head, the book is 3 rooms deep. Start with costs you can hold. Grain is bought when it is honest. The alewife watches sacks the way a shepherd watches lambs. Are they clean? Are they dry? Are they heavy with promise or with damp? Barley cheap after harvest turns dear when rats vote. Cheap turns costly when a backlane floods and a week's malt swells into useless virtue. Fuel is a second spine of expense. Wood priced by the cart loses profit as smoke. Charcoal burns cleaner, counts itself twice. A tavern learns to think in chords and seasons, split in order, stack for heir to par. Pray the winter is not long enough to teach the wrong lesson about thrift. Rent sits like a quietly patient creditor. Pay the landlord and you keep your shutters. Miss a month and you learn how quickly a house is called someone else's by men who do not sweat here. Licenses arrive with seals and expectations. The Alconer's smile is cheaper than his frown, and either can cost you if your measures are not kept true. Fines are not rare. Neither are indulgences paid in respectful cups and the promise that closing will be more punctual this week than last. Then wages, which are not charity. The boy who runs the room is a hinge you oil or your door squeals. He is paid partly in the coin, partly in instruction, how to carry 3 jugs without courting disaster, how to turn an errand into a rescue, how to be seen without becoming a spectacle. The brewer's fee is a debt you pay in cash and in steadiness. She will prioritise your cask if you prioritise her tubs when returns come due. Women at the bar and at the hearth are paid as if they were optional in the town's stories and essential in the town's survival, which is to say, they are underpaid when told to their face and at their insistence. Miss Holomed kicked you up a sack of flour at cost, a winter cloak for a daughter, a rent week ease. Profit hides in inches. A ladle that drips is money walking away. A measure that domes above the rim is a sermon on generosity. The ledger cannot afford to preach nightly. Yet stinginess has a smell, and the room knows it. So the keeper practices an art that looks like fairness from every angle, Pour to the line, but let the better cups find the better tables when the night has been kind. Cut bread thick enough to honour hunger, and thin enough to return next week's custom. Post a price that does not insult a farmer's season or a mason's back. Currency itself brings drama. Pennies travel in many live, bright and new from the mint, honest and nicked from years of roofs, mean and clipped by men who think theft becomes arithmetic if practised with a knife. Farthings are easy to lose and easier to quarrel over. Groats change a day. The keeper touches each coin with the pad of her thumb as if reading braille. She knows pewter from silver by temperature, and lies from truth by weight. When counterfeits find the bar, and they will, she converts anger into policy. Mark the face of the coin with a cut, never spend it again. Keep it as a teaching tool, and tell the constable with a courtesy that makes him feel competent instead of burdened. Credit is oxygen. A chalk mark buys time for men whose income walks in on Friday, and for women whose income is called kindness until a husband's name sits on the page again. On the slate is not a plea here. It is a contract written in good faith and witnessed by the room. Bad faith is remembered longer than a wedding, good faith longer than a fine. When a man dies with a mark still on the board, the room erases it after asking his friends to carry wood to a widow twice. That is the tax structure of houses that prefer decency to litigation. Spoilage is the enemy without a face. Cider turns if a cask sulks in heat. Ale sours if the line of draws stops for a day too many. Wine sweats when the river sends humidity like gossip. The cellar is therefore a calendar. Casks are turned not by whim, but by memorized choreography. Chalk tells you what to serve first, ear tells you if the angel's share is turning greedy, nose tells you whether to sell today at a margin small enough to be called humility, rather than pour tomorrow at a loss called failure. The keeper has learned the old prayer of shopkeepers, let it move. Supply chains are people with mood. The carter promises to arrive by matins and shows at sext, because a wheel decided to argue with geometry. The fisherman's man is late after storms and sells at a price that blames God for weather and you for buying. The baker threatens the assize with loaves that flirt with lightness. The assize flirts back with fines that flirt with logic. The keeper threads these moods with a needle called reliability. Pay what you promised. Forgive once. Record everything. Never forgive twice without a plan for how to make the forgiveness teach something. Taxes are the weather no one can talk back to. Tolls on wine up or river rise because a lord's son imagines a campaign. Price per cup climbs without improving the cup's philosophy. The town levies for bridges and quarrels about their placement. The tavern contributes because broken bridges cost more than taxes, and because refusing to contribute earns you a reputation you cannot drink away. Church dues come in the currency of feast day obligation. Provide broth at the procession. Keep cups modest on fast eve. Pretend not to notice when a canon's morality grows flexible around weddings. You pay this tax intact and bold. Hidden economies run along the bar's edge. Pawning happens without name. A knife left for a night's shelter. A brooch traded for a week of bread and the promise of buyback if fortune apologizes. The keeper catalogues each in the ledger's invisible ink. The knife belongs to a man who will not ask for it until his pride has healed. The brooch to a girl whose story is none of anyone's business except that safety costs less when it's believed. When buybacks fail, the house sells with more regret than markup and keeps a loaner spoon behind the bar for the next such emergency. Margins widen with wit. A stew stretched honestly with barley buys time to sell cider before it forgets itself. A festival week, when coins move loosely and songs do accounting badly, is the moment to offer half measures at whole pride. Let many taste, and you will be remembered when wallets return to their ordinary pace. Winter narrows everything. So the house sells heat as product benches in the good buckle by the hearth cost a refill's worth of coin, and everyone accepts the tariff because winter taught them about tariffs before the alderman did. Risk management becomes architecture. Candles trimmed short save tallow and lives. Low beams reduce fights and therefore repairs. Rushes turned daily keep vermin argumental rather than victorious. Insurance is not a clerk with a quill, it is a routine. The constable's cup is policy. A midwife's good opinion is policy. The widow's report that your bowls were clean when her boy was sick is policy. Spilt ale is not a loss, it is the premium you pay to have a floor that forgives. The house writes this in no book and obeys it strictly. Accounting travels in stories. We gave credit to Tom when the mill wheel slipped. Becomes Tom brought back coin and help in haying. The brewer's cast. Cut slid a half mile on glass. Becomes her price rose a farthing for a fortnight. Becomes our cups stayed honest while the town learned patience. Stories track value in ways columns cannot. When an alderman arrives with sums and suspicion, The keeper can show numbers that balance and then tell the story that explains why a deficit last month was the town investing in its own immunity. Our traveller learns the tavern's algebra by lifting small weights. He carries a cask 2 yards and hears coin shift from risk to inventory. He rakes rushes and learns that cleanliness is interest accrued without boasting. He watches the keeper refuse a clipped penny with a smile that saves a friendship and a future sale. He watches her hand back 2 good coins when a man, drunk on shame, overpays for his slate. Later, that man returns with wood and never says why. This is born as Sheeta's citizenship. Evening prices are written with a chalk that rubs off tomorrow because certainty insults a world this tidal. Wheat rises, fish fall, a levy evaporates because some lord made new enemies and needs allies more than revenue. The tavern's price is a conversation between hope and the seller. When a regular frowns at a cup dearer by a sliver, the keeper answers with the truth scale to the man's appetite for it. River, toll, or bad road, or I paid the brewer what she deserved. The man nods because he has his own versions of those lines in his day. At the end of Profit's long corridor sits a hinge called Reputation. It swings quietly and decides whether tomorrow arrives with empty benches or a warm hum. Reputation is earned when a traveller, short of coin but long on honesty, is landed on a pallet and not on the street. When a soldier leaves a knife at the door and finds it returned. When a widow's broth tastes like gratitude rather than charity. The ledger behind the bar cannot write that column. The town writes it in the way it opens the door and the way it says your name at the pump. Night gathers again. The casks are where they should be. The measures shine just enough. The board's numbers make a shape that mean on survival. The keeper adds one last mark, 2 short lines that look like nothing and stand for everything. Kept faith. Profit follows faith here. Never the other way around. The traveller drinks, pays, and feels he has purchased not only warmth but a seat in a system that works because a dozen tiny decencies keep it from falling apart. Tomorrow we'll renegotiate all of this. Roads will change their minds, coins will tell new stories, the river will sulk or sing. The house is ready because it is built on habits that survive fashion. In towns like this, solvency is not a number, it is a practice. Stories of the taverns are the bread. They rise when the room is ready quiet at first, then shaped by hands that know when to fold and when to leave a line alone. News has its own grammar, but story is the grammar of belonging, and houses like this keep both on tap. Some nights it begins with a name spoken carefully, as if the room might bruise it. A mason says Eleanor and the bench leans without meaning to. The tale ends in laughter, because the point was not sorrow but a stone laid true on a day that could have been crooked. Other nights a traveller sets a cup on the board and offers a route as narrative. Places are characters, mud is motive. Ferrymen and their moods are the chorus that returns between verses. The keeper keeps a hand on pace. She will let a good story meander like a river until it threatens to flood the floorboards. Then she nudges it back into its banks with a question that sounds like a compliment. And after the 4, ballads live here the way cats do. Semi-domesticated and right where they want to be. A tune drifts in on a Monday, and by Thursday the words have changed clothes to suit the town's weather. The refrain is the law everyone agrees to remember. A soldier's boast becomes a parable about getting home with your pay and your teeth. A saint's miracle is rearranged until it sounds like common sense that managed to wear silk for a day. In winter, the songs come thick with warmth. Lists of food imagined into sufficiency. Fires described until the hearth blushes. Love sung as patience in good boots. In summer, tunes walk faster. They keep step with days that forget to end. Wakes teach the room how to carry sorrow without letting it spill. The dead are spoken of in the register that forgives without lying. He was stubborn, but the right kind, someone will say. And these benches nod because they can name the wrong kind without saying it. A cup is lifted not to drown grief, but to give it weight. Grief behaves better when it is asked to sit. A dish moves along the table with the inexorable kindness that women practice on rooms. Here, eat here, breathe here. Tell the story where he made you laugh even when you did not intend to. The church owns the rite, the tavern owns the aftermath in which people remember how to continue. Courtship does not parade, it rehearses. Eyes learn to keep time in a way that would make music jealous if music were petty. A girl sets a cup down near a boy and the table acquires a centre. A boy offers to fetch wood and the offer is a poem disguised as logistics. Permission is negotiated by the room as much as by the pair. The keeper decides which corners become safe theatres. The women decide which glances count as speech and which as weather. The dice table is moved half a yard away on such nights luck has no business near vows. Even if vows are only imagined out loud by no one. If a proposal's ever made here, it is made later, in daylight, on a doorstep with a father present and a mother listening from the breadboard. The tavern is rehearsal space, real declarations prefer thresholds. The church's calendar tunes the tavern's evenings like a careful hand tunes a lute. Advent narrows light and raises candles. Voices drop without needing to be asked. Lent leans the menu toward river and garden. Music learns humility, then makes it sound like taste rather than rule. Easter explodes in the kitchen verse, with eggs coloured by onion skins and patience. And then in the rue, which remembers how to laugh with its shoulders. Regation days bring fields into talk. Prayers for crops are murmured by the men who claim never to pray, and by women who have been praying out loud with their work all year. On the eve of a saint who is rumoured to be kind to lovers or stubborn children or lost animal, the room indulges in gentle superstition, a ribbon tie, a token pocketed, a cup lifted to courage. Fairs are the town's theatre a week, and the tavern plays orchestra. Pit. Performers bleed into the room, singers who smell of wool and miles, tumblers with wrists wrapped for insurance, sellers who can turn a list of buttons into an aria. Prices go strange for a day or two because supply and sense have agreed to a truce. The tavern spreads its benches wider, thins its stew to generosity rather than stinginess, and asks the dice to rest. Money's already being asked to perform too many roles. Afterward, when the square is left with straw and a few honest regrets, the room returns to scale and counts itself lucky if the ledger's sums and the floor's scratches are both survivable. Winter he harpens certain stories until they answer as tool, nights lengthen. Cups sweeten. People remember fires that did not hold and neighbours who did. A wheelwright tells how wheel split at frost and was mended in the snow by 3 hands and a 4th that only held the lantern. A widow says very little and is given more of bread, of respect, because the town recalls winter as an exam, and everyone prefers to pass together. The tavern runs on a recipe of heat, salt, and listening. A boy stares into the hearth and hears in its crackle a map of futures that include craft. Decency, perhaps even a tool with his own mark on it. He is not wrong. Rooms like this are where a town decides to trust itself with the next generation. Summer scatters story into smaller, brighter pieces, workday stretch, and evenings arrive already tired. The room shortens its talk, it serves lemons when it can pretend them and mint when it cannot. It moves the benches to where the door can persuade the heat to act like a guest. Love songs prefer the yard, where the air is taller. A travelling piper coaxes children into a ring and returns them to their mothers as if they had been laundry shaken. Suntouch. Improve. The tavern sells shade as product and as well. Plague and bad years do not become poetry here. They become practice. When sickness travels, cups learn to be scoured even more fiercely. Hands learn to find water twice as often. Kisses are counted rather than squandered. The talk changes shape. Less bad sissung, less boasting. More inventory of who needs broth, who needs quiet, who needs an errand done without the debt being spoken aloud. The house becomes a logistics office for mercy again, this time with the candles trimmed shorter and the doors negotiated like treaties. Fear is managed by work, grief is managed by names written carefully and remembered aloud when remembering hurts and helps equally. When the worst passes, and it does, more often than despair predicts, the room rebuilds its laugh like a muscle that had been allowed to rest. The road keeps bringing fresh grammar. A peddler explains the new coin with a hole in it and the room adopts the phrase honest weight as if it had invented it. A scholar from the abbey turns ale into lesson by telling how the Romans salted their roads and left the ills of their appetites for later. A woman returning from a saint's well tells of a riddle scratched in stone that taught her to forgive herself for being tired. The tavern is generous with patience for strangers who have paid their fare in walking. In exchange, it expects a story that can be cut into portions and fed to a town until the next cart arrives. And then there are the little household myths that accrete until they hold the weight of truth because they hold the weight of affection. The cat guards the casks, never mind that mice have learned diplomacy. The low beam instructs men in humility as a moral rather than as architecture. The keeper's ledger is rumoured to balance itself at night because the room wants decency to be automatic. These fictions offend no one and maintain men need. They are the tavern's saints, canonised by repetition. Our traveller, who came first with a hunger for warmth and a curiosity sharp enough to nick himself on, finds that the room has given him more than supper and sleep. It has loaned him a vocabulary for ordinary goodness. He knows now what to ask for in a strange tower. Measures in sight, a candle honest to dice. Stew that has listened to itself all day, a ledger that writes later kindly. He knows how to pay, in coin, in errands, in the courtesy of leaving the room a little easier than he found it. He has learned which stories to carry onward and which to let die here, like sparks folded under ash for the safety of the house. The night rises again, as it always does, and the tavern meets it with the craft of people who build peace out of heat, and rules you can drink from. Story climbs onto its stool without fanfare and clears its throat. Someone begins, "There was a day when the river forgot its name. Candles lean in, cups align, the ledger watches from its corner with benign suspicion. Outside, Rain tries the latch and is refused politely. Inside, a town practices being human together for another few hours. That is the tale. Every night, dressed in different clothes,